The concept of Valhalla emerges from archaeological shadows cast across Bronze Age Scandinavia, where warrior societies first established the fundamental patterns that would crystallise into the most famous Hall of the Dead in Germanic mythology. Between 1700 and 500 BZ, excavations across Denmark, southern Sweden and Norway reveal a consistent pattern of elite burial practices that demonstrate the centrality of the warrior ethos and hall-based social organisation that would later find its mythological expression in Odin's Great Hall. The Kivik grave in southeastern Sweden, dating to approximately 1400 BC, provides compelling evidence for early warrior cult practices. This massive stone cyst contains bronze razors, swords, and ceremonial axes arranged around the deceased, while the interior stone slabs display carved scenes of warriors, chariots, and what appear to be processions toward a large building structure. The iconography suggests that even in the Middle Bronze Age, Scandinavian elites conceived of death as a transition to a warrior afterlife centred around a great hall. Similar patterns emerge from the Sagaholm Barrow complex in Västergötland, where bronze weapons were deliberately broken and placed with the dead, indicating ritualised killing of objects to accompany warriors into the next world. Archaeological evidence from sites like Apakra and Skana reveals the physical manifestation of hall-centred society structures that would provide the template for Valhalla's conception. The Great Hall at Upakra, continuously rebuilt and expanded from the 1st century BC through the 10th century AD, measured over 50 metres in length and featured massive timber posts supporting a roof structure that could accommodate hundreds of warriors. The hall's floor contained deposits of weapons, jewellery and animal bones from repeated feasting, creating literal layers of warrior culture. These archaeological deposits demonstrate that the hall functioned simultaneously as political centre, religious focus and symbolic representation of the cosmic order. The linguistic archaeology of Valhalla reveals equally ancient roots extending deep into Proto-Germanic antiquity. The compound derives from Proto-Germanic Valhaz, meaning those slain in battle or battlefield dead, combined with hallo, denoting a covered building or hall. The first element connects to a broader Indo-European root well, meaning to strike down or wound, which appears in Celtic wallow and Latin vulnus. This linguistic connection suggests that the concept of warrior dead as a distinct category existed across multiple Indo-European cultures before Germanic speakers separated into distinct tribal groups. The evolution of Valhaz across Germanic dialects provides crucial insights into how the concept developed. In Gothic, the term appears as wallus, meaning staff or rod, but also metaphorically referring to warriors. Old High German Wala originally denoted foreign warriors, particularly Celts, before expanding to mean any warrior dead. The Old Norse development into Valar represents the most specialised evolution of the term, indicating that Scandinavian cultures developed the most elaborate conceptual framework around warrior death. The consistency of the hallo element across all Germanic languages, Old English Hel, Old High German Halla, Gothic Hallus, demonstrates the fundamental importance of the hall structure in Germanic social organisation. The second element, hallo, derives from the Proto-Indo-European root kel, meaning to cover or conceal, which also produces Latin cella and Greek kalyptine. This etymology reveals that halls were conceived primarily as protective enclosures, spaces that provided security and shelter from the hostile external world. In Germanic contexts, halls represented the ordered cosmos opposed to the chaos of the wilderness, making them natural symbols for the afterlife destination of warriors who died defending social order. Comparative analysis reveals striking parallels between Germanic warrior afterlife concepts and similar beliefs across the Indo-European world. Celtic traditions describe the otherworld halls of figures like Manannán mac Lir and the Dagda, where heroes feast eternally after death in battle. The Irish Sid Mounds contained halls where the Tuatha De Danann maintained their warrior bands, complete with endless supplies of mead and pork. Welsh traditions preserve similar concepts in the halls of Annan, the otherworld realm where Gwyn ap Nudd leads the eternal hunt. These Celtic parallels suggest a shared Indo-European substrate of beliefs about warrior afterlife centered on hall-based communities. Indo-Iranian traditions provide additional comparative evidence through concepts like the Zoroastrian House of Song, where righteous warriors enjoy eternal feasting and combat. The Avestan texts describe this paradise as a great hall, where heroes who died fighting against the forces of darkness continue their struggle in spiritual form. Vedic traditions similarly describe the Hall of Indra, where warriors who died in battle join the god's retinue for eternal warfare against demons and dragons. These parallels indicate that the association between warrior death, halls, and continued martial activity represents an ancient Indo-European religious pattern rather than a uniquely Germanic innovation. The archaeological record of pre-Christian Scandinavian burial practices provides concrete evidence for beliefs that directly prefigure Valhalla's imagery and symbolism. Ship burials, first appearing in the Scandinavian Bronze Age and continuing through the Viking period, demonstrate consistent beliefs about death as a journey to a distant hall. The Hjortspring boat from Als, Denmark, dating to 400-300 BC, contained weapons and shields arranged as if the vessel carried a full warrior crew into the afterlife. The ship's construction, with overlapping planks sealed with resin, created a watertight chamber that functioned as both tomb and transport vessel. Later ship burials at sites like Sutton Hoo in England and Oseberg in Norway elaborate this pattern with increasingly sophisticated grave goods and architectural elements. The Oseberg ship burial contained not only weapons and jewellery, but also a wooden cart, sleds and textile fragments that suggest the deceased expected to maintain a complete household in the afterlife. The ship's construction included a burial chamber built into the vessel's centre, creating a hall-like space where the dead could hold court. These burials demonstrate that Scandinavian elites conceived of death as relocation to a distant hall accessible only by ship travel. Weapon deposits in lakes, bogs and rivers throughout Scandinavia provide additional evidence for beliefs about warrior afterlife that prefigure Valhalla concepts. The Hjortspring deposit contained over 150 spears, 20 shields and multiple swords thrown into a bog, apparently as offerings to divine powers associated with war and death. Similar deposits at Illerup Adel, Vimose and Thorsberg contain thousands of weapons, many deliberately broken or killed before deposition. The scale and consistency of these deposits across several centuries indicates systematic religious practices focused on transferring weapons to divine warriors in the afterlife. The ritual destruction of weapons before deposition parallels descriptions of Valhalla, where Einherjar receive new weapons each day for their eternal battles. Archaeological analysis reveals that swords were bent, spear points snapped off, and shield bosses crushed before being thrown into the water. This deliberate destruction transforms functional weapons into ritual objects suitable for otherworldly use, suggesting beliefs that divine warriors required specially prepared equipment different from earthly weapons. The geographic distribution of weapon deposits follows major river systems and trade routes, indicating that these rituals occurred at significant landscape features that served as boundaries between the human and divine worlds. Hall-burning rituals documented in both archaeological and literary sources provide the most direct prefiguration of Valhalla imagery. Excavations at sites like Ledra in Denmark reveal evidence for the deliberate burning of great halls, followed by their reconstruction on the same foundations. The burned layers contain high concentrations of weapons, jewellery and feasting equipment, suggesting that hall destruction involved elaborate ritual deposits. The pattern repeats across multiple building phases, indicating that hall burning and rebuilding formed part of regular ceremonial cycles, rather than responses to accidental fires or enemy attacks. The Gudmalundeborg complex on Funen provides exceptional evidence for hall-centred ritual practices that prefigure Valhalla concepts. The site contains remains of multiple great halls built and rebuilt over several centuries, each associated with massive deposits of gold objects, weapons and imported luxury goods. The hall's construction incorporated specific architectural features, raised floors, carved posts and central hearths that match descriptions of divine halls in later mythological sources. The concentration of wealth and ritual activity at Gudme suggests that it functioned as a religious centre where earthly halls served as models for divine counterparts. The integration of these archaeological, linguistic and comparative elements reveals that Valhalla emerged from deep-rooted Germanic traditions about warrior death, hall-centred society and divine warfare that extended back into the Bronze Age. The concept did not appear suddenly in Viking Age literature, but developed gradually through centuries of cultural evolution, incorporating elements from across the Indo-European world while maintaining distinctively Germanic characteristics. The physical evidence from burial sites, weapon deposits, and hall excavations demonstrates that beliefs about warrior afterlife in great halls formed central elements of Scandinavian religion long before the emergence of written sources that first recorded the name Valhalla. The transition from archaeological shadows to literary illumination occurs dramatically in the collection of mythological poetry known as the Poetic Edda, where Valhalla emerges fully formed as the central institution of the Germanic afterlife. These poems, preserved in the 13th century Codex Regius, but reflecting oral traditions extending back to the early Viking Age, provide the first detailed descriptions of Odin's hall and establish the foundational imagery that would dominate all subsequent treatments of the subject. The Edic corpus transforms the Proto-Germanic warrior afterlife concepts, evidenced in Bronze Age burial practices, into a sophisticated theological and cosmological system centred on Valhalla's role in the cosmic order. Grimnismal stands as the most comprehensive early source for Valhalla's physical description and organisational structure. This poem, consisting of 54 stanzas, presents Odin disguised as Grimnir, delivering a monologue that systematically describes the geography of the divine realm. The poem's composition likely dates to the 9th or 10th century, making it contemporary with the height of Viking Age expansion, when warrior culture reached its most elaborate development. The text's detailed architectural descriptions suggest the poet drew from direct experience of contemporary royal halls, projecting earthly magnificence onto cosmic scales. The poem's most famous passage describes Valhalla's extraordinary dimensions: 500 doors and 40 more. I think there are in Valhalla. 800 Einherjar go out of each door when they go to fight the wolf. This mathematical precision creates a hall containing 432,000 entrances, each accommodating 800 warriors, suggesting a total capacity exceeding 345 million Einherjar. The specific numbers carry cosmological significance beyond mere hyperbole. The number 540 represents the product of sacred numbers 108 multiplied by 5, where 108 appears throughout Indo-European religious systems as representing cosmic completeness. The Hindu tradition recognises 108 as the number of Upanishads, while Buddhist prayer beads contain exactly this number of elements. The 800 warriors emerging from each door connects to the Old Norse word atunda, meaning eighth, which appears in contexts describing supernatural multiplication or cosmic abundance. The total capacity of over 345 million warriors reflects the poem's conception of Ragnarök as a conflict requiring unprecedented military mobilization. The mathematical precision demonstrates that Grimnismal presents Valhalla not as a vague paradise, but as a carefully organized military installation designed for specific strategic purposes. The poet's attention to logistical details reveals familiarity with actual military planning and suggests that contemporary audiences expected realistic explanations for how divine warfare would function. The poem describes Valhalla's roof as constructed from shields and supported by spear shafts, creating architecture from weapons rather than conventional building materials. Spear shafts stand for rafters. The hall is roofed with shields. Mailcoats lie on the benches. This weaponized architecture transforms the hall itself into an extension of military equipment, blurring boundaries between shelter and armament. The image reflects actual Viking Age practices where shields were used to create temporary shelters during military campaigns, but elevates this practical technique to cosmic proportions. The description continues with details about Valhalla's supernatural illumination. A wolf hangs in front of the western door, and an eagle hovers above. These guardian animals represent Odin's association with predatory creatures that consume battlefield dead. The wolf, Jerry, and eagle symbolize the transformation of carrion eaters into divine servants, suggesting that Valhalla exists at the intersection between death and regeneration. The western door's significance relates to sunset symbolism, where the daily death of light parallels the warrior's transition from earthly life to divine service. Grimnismal establishes Valhalla's daily routine through descriptions of the Einherjar's activities. All the Einherjar / every day choose the slain and ride from battle. Then they sit in peace together. This passage introduces the fundamental paradox of warrior afterlife: eternal combat combined with peaceful fellowship. The warriors spend each day fighting until death, then resurrect for evening feasting, creating a cycle that combines the ultimate warrior experience with complete social harmony. The poem presents this routine as the ideal resolution of earthly conflicts between martial prowess and community stability. The feasting descriptions emphasize supernatural abundance. The boar Sarimnir is boiled every day and is whole again at evening. The cosmic pig provides unlimited meat for the Einherjar, while the goat Heidrun supplies endless mead from her udders. These images transform ordinary feast foods into regenerating resources that eliminate scarcity from the afterlife experience. The supernatural abundance ensures that competition for resources cannot disrupt the warrior's fellowship, creating perfect conditions for eternal military brotherhood. Völuspá, the opening poem of the Eddic collection, provides crucial context for Valhalla's role in cosmic history by describing its function during Ragnarök. The seeress's prophecy traces the universe's development from creation through destruction, positioning Valhalla as a critical element in the final battle between order and chaos. The poem's composition probably predates Grimnismal by several decades, suggesting that Valhalla's apocalyptic significance preceded detailed descriptions of its daily operations. The seeress describes Odin's recruitment of Einherjar. I see there wading Srara through heavy streams, men who broke oaths and murderers. This passage indicates that Valhalla's population includes not only honourable battle dead but also oathbreakers and criminals whose deaths in combat qualified them for divine service. The inclusion of morally ambiguous warriors suggests that martial prowess rather than ethical behaviour determines admission to Odin's hall. This criterion reflects the practical requirements of divine warfare, where combat effectiveness takes precedence over moral purity. Völuspá describes the Einherjar's mobilization for Ragnarök. The Einherjar arm themselves and ride onto the battlefield. The poem presents this deployment as the culmination of centuries of preparation, where accumulated warrior dead finally fulfill their purpose as Odin's army against the forces of chaos. The brevity of this description contrasts with elaborate accounts of the Einherjar's daily training, suggesting that their ultimate battle represents the natural conclusion of their eternal preparation rather than a dramatic transformation of their existence. The seeress's vision includes Valhalla's fate during the cosmic conflagration. Surtur rides from the south, with fire-destroying branches. The son of the gods of the slain shines from his sword. This passage implies that even Valhalla cannot survive Ragnarok's destruction, making the Einherjar's sacrifice meaningful precisely because it occurs within a finite cosmic cycle. The hall's destruction alongside the rest of the universe demonstrates that divine institutions share mortality with earthly counterparts, creating theological consistency within the mythological system. Vafthrudnismal contributes additional details about Valhalla's cosmic significance through its wisdom contest between Odin and the giant Vafthrudnir. This poem emphasizes Odin's role as host and his relationship with the Einherjar through questions about divine knowledge and cosmic secrets. The dialogue format allows for systematic exploration of mythological details that narrative poems handle more impressionistically. The giant asks about the Einherjar's activities. What do the Einherjar do when they are not fighting? Odin's response elaborates the daily cycle. Every day they choose the slain and ride from battle, then they sit in peace and drink mead. This exchange establishes the rhythm of afterlife existence while emphasizing the integration of combat and fellowship. The giant's question suggests that even divine enemies recognize the Einherjar's importance in cosmic affairs, while Odin's detailed response demonstrates his intimate knowledge of their activities. The poem explores Odin's motivations for gathering warriors. Much I travelled, much I tried out, much I tested the powers. What will happen to the gods when the mighty winter comes? This passage connects Valhalla's military preparations directly to Odin's knowledge of Ragnarök, suggesting that the hall's existence results from divine foresight rather than spontaneous creation. Odin's travels and tests represent reconnaissance activities designed to understand the threats facing the cosmic order, making the Einherjar recruitment part of a comprehensive defensive strategy. Vafthrudnismal also addresses the selection criteria for Einherjar through indirect references to battlefield death. Those who fall in Odin's embrace go to the Golden Hall. The euphemistic language transforms violent death into divine selection, suggesting that warriors killed in battle receive Odin's personal attention rather than suffering random misfortune. This theological interpretation elevates battlefield casualties from tragic losses to meaningful sacrifices that serve cosmic purposes. The Eddic poems employ sophisticated poetic devices to describe Valhalla and its inhabitants, creating a specialised vocabulary that emphasises the hall's unique characteristics. Kennings, metaphorical compound phrases that replace simple nouns, appear throughout these texts to describe warriors, weapons, and divine locations. The Einherjar receive numerous kennings: Odin's guests, choosers of the slain, wolf feeders, and raven gladdeners. These phrases emphasise different aspects of warrior identity, while connecting them to Odin's broader mythological associations. Valhalla itself receives elaborate kenning treatment: Hall of the Slain, Odin's Hall, Shield Hall, and Spear Hall. These metaphorical descriptions emphasise the building's military character while avoiding repetitive use of the proper name. The kenning system creates semantic networks that link Valhalla to weapons, death, divine authority, and cosmic warfare through poetic association rather than direct statement. This technique allows poets to explore complex theological concepts through accumulated metaphorical layers rather than systematic exposition. The poems utilise alliterative verse patterns that emphasise key concepts through sound repetition. Lines describing Valhalla consistently place stressed syllables on words related to warfare, death, and divine power. Glittering weapons gleam in the Golden Hall, or spear shafts stand supporting the shield roof. The alliterative structure reinforces semantic content through acoustic emphasis, creating memorable phrases that facilitate oral transmission while highlighting important theological concepts. Eddic poetry also employs systematic imagery patterns that connect Valhalla to broader mythological themes. Light imagery appears consistently in descriptions of the hall's appearance. Golden walls, gleaming weapons, and bright shields create visual associations with divine radiance and supernatural power. This luminous quality distinguishes Valhalla from earthly halls, while connecting it to other divine locations described in similar terms throughout the mythological corpus. Animal imagery provides another systematic element in Valhalla descriptions. Ravens, wolves, eagles, and boars appear repeatedly in connection with the hall and its inhabitants, creating a bestiary of creatures associated with war and death. These animals serve multiple functions, as Odin's servants and messengers, as symbols of battlefield scavenging, and as sources of supernatural sustenance for the Einherjar. The consistent animal imagery creates thematic unity across different poems, while reinforcing Valhalla's connection to the natural world's predatory relationships. The Eddic treatment of time in Valhalla descriptions reveals sophisticated theological thinking about eternity and cyclical renewal. The Einherjar's daily routine of combat, death, and resurrection creates a temporal pattern that combines linear progression with circular repetition. Each day brings new battles and experiences, satisfying the linear desire for continued existence, while the cyclical structure ensures that no day differs fundamentally from any other, creating the stability associated with eternal paradise. This temporal structure reflects broader Germanic concepts about cosmic cycles, where creation and destruction alternate in endless repetition. Valhalla exists within this cyclical framework, serving its purpose during each cosmic age, before being destroyed and presumably recreated for the next cycle. The Hall's temporal existence thus mirrors the universe's own rhythm of birth, growth, decay, and renewal, integrating the warrior afterlife into the broadest possible cosmological context. The Eddic poems establish Valhalla as far more than a simple warrior paradise, presenting it instead as a crucial institution within a complex theological system that addresses fundamental questions about death, duty, cosmic order, and divine justice. The detailed descriptions in Grimnismal, the apocalyptic context provided by Völuspá, and the systematic exploration in Vafthrudnismal create a comprehensive literary foundation that subsequent treatments of Valhalla would elaborate and modify but never entirely replace. The transformation of Valhalla from fragmented poetic imagery into systematic theological doctrine reached its culmination in the early 13th century through the scholarly efforts of Snorri Sturluson, whose Prose Edda represents the most comprehensive medieval attempt to codify Norse mythology into coherent narrative form. Writing from his estate at Reykholt around 1220, Snorri possessed unique qualifications for this monumental task: aristocratic birth that provided access to extensive manuscript collections, legal training that emphasized systematic organization of complex information, and poetic expertise that enabled sophisticated interpretation of skaldic verse. His methodical approach to mythological material created the definitive medieval synthesis of Valhalla traditions, establishing interpretive frameworks that continue to influence modern understanding of Norse afterlife concepts. Snorri's Gylfaginning opens with King Gylfi of Sweden disguised as Gangleri, seeking wisdom from three mysterious figures, High, just as High, and Third, who reveal the secrets of Norse cosmology through systematic questioning. This dialogue structure allows Snorri to present mythological information as revealed knowledge rather than personal speculation, lending authority to his interpretations, while maintaining distance from potentially heretical content. The three respondents function as composite voices of traditional wisdom, enabling Snorri to synthesize contradictory sources without explicitly choosing between competing versions of mythological events. The architectural description of Valhalla in Gylfaginning demonstrates Snorri's systematic approach to organizing scattered poetic references into coherent physical descriptions. Where Eddic poetry provided fragmentary images of shield roofs and spear supports, Snorri constructs a detailed building that readers can visualize completely. The hall stretches so far that its ends disappear beyond sight, while its roof consists of golden shields that reflect light throughout the interior space. The walls rise from foundations of massive stone blocks to heights that dwarf earthly buildings, creating an architectural monument that combines practical military design with supernatural grandeur. Snorri's description emphasizes Valhalla's golden roof as its most distinctive architectural feature, departing from earlier poetic sources that focus primarily on weaponized construction materials. The golden covering serves multiple symbolic functions within his systematic presentation. It demonstrates Odin's wealth and power, provides supernatural illumination for the hall's interior, and creates visual connections to other divine locations described in similar terms throughout the mythological corpus. The gold's imperishable nature ensures that Valhalla's roof will maintain its brilliance throughout the ages leading to Ragnarök, symbolizing the eternal nature of divine institutions despite their ultimate destruction. The spear-supported structure receives elaborate technical explanation in Snorri's account, where countless spear shafts serve as both architectural elements and symbolic representations of the Einherjar's martial purpose. These supports consist of ashwood harvested from Yggdrasil's branches, connecting Valhalla's physical structure directly to the world tree that supports the entire cosmos. The spear's iron points face upward toward the golden roof, creating a forest of weapons that transforms the hall's interior into a symbolic battlefield, where every architectural element reinforces military themes. Snorri systematizes the Einherjar selection process through detailed explanation of Valkyrie activities and divine decision-making procedures that earlier sources treated impressionistically. The Valkyries operate according to specific protocols established by Odin, who determines general selection criteria while delegating tactical implementation to his female servants. Warriors who die courageously in battle while fighting against superior odds receive priority consideration, particularly those who continue fighting despite mortal wounds or impossible tactical situations. The selection process emphasizes martial virtue over social status, ensuring that Valhalla's population consists of proven fighters rather than merely aristocratic casualties. The Valkyries themselves receive systematic classification in Snorri's presentation, where he distinguishes between different ranks and specializations within their divine service. Senior Valkyries like Skuld and Gondul possess authority to make independent selection decisions during major battles, while junior members operate under direct supervision from their superiors. Some Valkyries specialize in specific warrior types, cavalry fighters, archers, or naval combatants, ensuring that Valhalla's population maintains balanced military capabilities suitable for diverse combat situations during Ragnarök. Snorri's account details the Valkyries' appearance and equipment with precision that reflects contemporary aristocratic military culture. They wear mail coats constructed from silver rings that provide complete protection without restricting movement, while their helmets feature golden decorations that identify their divine status to both living warriors and the battlefield dead. Their weapons include spears forged from meteoric iron and swords that never dull or break, emphasizing their supernatural nature while maintaining recognizable connections to earthly military equipment. The transportation of selected warriors to Valhalla receives systematic explanation through Snorri's description of Valkyrie horses and their supernatural capabilities. These mounts possess the ability to travel instantly between battlefields and the divine realm, carrying both Valkyries and newly selected Einherjar across cosmic distances without temporal delay. The horse's supernatural nature allows them to bear multiple passengers simultaneously while maintaining perfect speed and stability, ensuring efficient collection of battle casualties from across the mortal world. Snorri's Skaldskaparmal provides the most detailed account of daily life within Valhalla, systematizing scattered poetic references into comprehensive descriptions of the Einherjar's routine activities. The warriors wake each morning at dawn to the sound of Gjallarhorn, then arm themselves with weapons that appear automatically beside their sleeping places. These arms surpass earthly equipment in every respect. Swords that cut through any material, spears that never miss their targets, and shields that cannot be penetrated by any weapon. The supernatural quality of this equipment ensures that combat training achieves maximum effectiveness while eliminating concerns about weapon maintenance or replacement. The daily combat exercises follow structured patterns designed to prepare the Einherjar for their ultimate battle against the forces of chaos. Morning sessions focus on individual weapons training, where warriors perfect their skills with swords, spears, axes and bows under the supervision of veteran Einherjar who died in earlier ages. Afternoon activities involve unit tactics, where groups practice formation fighting, cavalry charges, and coordinated maneuvers that will prove essential during Ragnarok's complex battle scenarios. The most distinctive aspect of Valhalla's training regimen involves combat sessions where Einherjar fight each other to actual death, then resurrect for evening feasting. This practice allows warriors to experience the full intensity of mortal combat without permanent consequences, creating training conditions that perfectly replicate battlefield reality. The daily death and resurrection cycle also serves theological purposes within Snorri's systematic presentation, demonstrating divine power over mortality while ensuring that aggressive impulses find appropriate outlets that do not disrupt the hall's social harmony. Snorri systematizes the evening feasting through detailed descriptions of supernatural food sources and service procedures that transform scattered mythological references into coherent institutional practices. The boar Sarimnir provides unlimited meat through daily regeneration, while the goat Heidrun supplies endless mead from udders that never empty. The automatic renewal of these food sources eliminates scarcity from Valhalla's economy, creating perfect conditions for generous hospitality that reinforces social bonds among the Einherjar. The mead-serving Valkyries operate according to strict protocols that ensure efficient service while maintaining appropriate ceremonial dignity. Senior Valkyries serve Odin and the most distinguished Einherjar at the high table, while junior members attend to the general warrior population throughout the hall's vast interior. The serving procedures follow elaborate etiquette rules that demonstrate respect for martial achievement while reinforcing hierarchical relationships based on combat experience and divine favour. Snorri's systematic approach extends to detailed explanations of seating arrangements within Valhalla that reflect both military organisation and social status among the Einherjar. Warriors who died in particularly famous battles receive places of honour near Odin's high seat, while more recent arrivals occupy positions further from the centre of ceremonial activity. This arrangement creates incentives for distinguished service while ensuring that all Einherjar receive appropriate recognition for their sacrificial deaths in battle. The integration of Christian theological concepts into Snorri's presentation of Valhalla represents his most sophisticated interpretive achievement, where he transforms pagan afterlife beliefs into forms compatible with medieval Christian cosmology without completely abandoning their distinctive Norse characteristics. Snorri presents Odin as a powerful but ultimately finite being who operates within cosmic limitations rather than exercising absolute divine authority. This theological framework allows Christian readers to appreciate Norse mythology as a historical curiosity, rather than competing religious system, while preserving the dramatic tension essential to mythological narrative. Snorri's Christian influences appear most clearly in his moral interpretation of the Einherjar selection process, where he emphasizes divine justice and ethical considerations that receive minimal attention in earlier sources. Warriors who die defending innocent people or protecting their communities receive preferential consideration for Valhalla admission, while those killed during raids or aggressive warfare face more stringent evaluation of their motivations and conduct. This moral framework transforms Valhalla from a simple warrior paradise into an institution that rewards virtuous behaviour rather than mere combat effectiveness. The concept of divine judgment permeates Snorri's systematic presentation through repeated emphasis on Odin's wisdom and moral authority in selecting Einherjar candidates. Odin possesses complete knowledge of each warrior's thoughts, motivations, and past actions, enabling perfectly just decisions about afterlife destinations. This omniscient divine authority reflects Christian theological concepts, while maintaining distinctively Norse characteristics that prevent complete assimilation to medieval Christian doctrine. Snorri's methodology in reconstructing Valhalla mythology demonstrates sophisticated scholarly techniques that anticipate modern historical and philological approaches to ancient sources. He systematically collected skaldic poetry from multiple periods and regions, comparing different versions of mythological references to identify consistent elements while noting significant variations. This comparative approach enabled him to distinguish between essential mythological content and local or temporal modifications that reflected specific cultural contexts rather than universal Norse beliefs. The use of skaldic poetry as primary source material required sophisticated interpretive skills due to the complex metaphorical language and cultural assumptions embedded in these texts. Snorri's legal training provided essential background for analysing the precise terminology and technical vocabulary that skalds employed when describing mythological subjects. His familiarity with contemporary Icelandic legal procedures also enabled him to understand the institutional frameworks that earlier poets assumed their audiences would recognise automatically. Snorri's systematic citation of specific skaldic verses throughout his prose narrative creates a scholarly apparatus that allows readers to evaluate his interpretive decisions against the primary sources he consulted. This methodological transparency demonstrates intellectual honesty while providing evidence for the widespread distribution of Valhalla traditions across different periods and regions of the Norse cultural sphere. The consistent appearance of similar imagery and concepts in poetry attributed to different composers from various centuries supports Snorri's claim that his systematic presentation reflects authentic traditional beliefs rather than personal speculation. The integration of oral traditions into Snorri's written synthesis required careful evaluation of the reliability and antiquity of different narrative elements. Snorri possessed access to elderly informants who preserved traditional stories through memorized recitation, enabling him to supplement written sources with oral material that might preserve authentic details absent from surviving manuscripts. His systematic comparison of oral and written traditions reveals sophisticated understanding of how mythological knowledge transmitted across generations through different media. Snorri's treatment of contradictory source materials demonstrates methodological sophistication that acknowledges the complexity of traditional knowledge systems while maintaining narrative coherence in his systematic presentation. When sources provided incompatible details about Valhalla's characteristics or the Einherjar's activities, Snorri typically selected the version that best integrated with his overall interpretive framework while noting alternative traditions in subsidiary passages. This approach preserves valuable information about mythological variation, while avoiding the confusion that would result from presenting all contradictory elements as equally authoritative. The geographical scope of Snorri's source materials encompasses the entire Norse cultural region, including Iceland, Norway, Denmark, and Swedish territories, demonstrating the widespread distribution of Valhalla traditions throughout medieval Scandinavia. His systematic collection of regional variations reveals both the fundamental consistency of core mythological concepts and the local modifications that reflected specific cultural conditions in different areas. This comprehensive geographical coverage supports the authenticity of his systematic presentation, while documenting the cultural unity that characterized Norse civilization despite political fragmentation. The emergence of Valkyries as central figures in Valhalla's mythology represents one of the most complex evolutionary processes in Germanic religious development, transforming from primitive battlefield spirits into sophisticated divine agents responsible for warrior selection and cosmic order maintenance. Archaeological evidence from the 6th through 10th centuries reveals this transformation through material culture, while literary sources document the theological refinement that elevated Valkyries from terrifying death demons to noble handmaidens of Odin. The Valkyrie connection to Valhalla extends beyond simple messenger duties to encompass fundamental questions about divine justice, warrior virtue, and the mechanisms through which mortal actions achieve cosmic significance. The earliest archaeological evidence for Valkyrie-like figures appears in 6th century Scandinavian burial contexts, where female figures with weapons accompany male warrior graves. The Vendel period cemetery at Gamla Uppsala contains several burials where bronze figurines depicting armed women were placed alongside swords, spears, and shields. These figurines measure between 3 and 7 centimeters in height and display consistent iconographic features. Long hair bound with metal circlets, knee-length tunics, and spears held in aggressive postures. The figurines' placement within weapon deposits suggests they functioned as protective spirits associated with martial equipment rather than representations of living warrior women. Similar figurines from the Valsgard cemetery complex show evolutionary development in Valkyrie iconography during the 7th and 8th centuries. Later examples display more elaborate clothing details, including what appear to be mail shirts rendered in miniature bronze scales. The spears become longer and more prominent, while some figures carry circular objects that likely represent shields. The increasing sophistication of these representations parallels the development of more complex warrior burial practices, suggesting that Valkyrie concepts evolved alongside changing military technologies and social organisation. The most significant archaeological evidence for Valkyrie worship appears in the form of gold bracteates, thin gold medallions worn as pendants produced throughout Scandinavia during the 5th through 7th centuries. The Trollhättan bracteate from Västergötland depicts a female figure with elaborate braided hair holding a drinking horn above a prone male warrior. Runic inscriptions around the medallion's edge include the phrase Alu, a magical formula associated with protection and divine favour. The scene's composition suggests the female figure serves as an intermediary between divine and mortal realms, offering spiritual sustenance to fallen warriors. The Funen Bracteate collection provides extensive evidence for systematic Valkyrie iconography across multiple production centres. Over 40 examples from various Danish sites display consistent imagery, female figures with bird attributes, typically ravens or eagles, attending to warriors in various states of combat or death. The bird associations connect these figures to Odin's ravens, Hugin and Munin, suggesting that Valkyries functioned as extensions of divine surveillance and communication systems. The standardization of this imagery across different regions indicates widespread cultural recognition of Valkyrie roles in warrior afterlife beliefs. Bracteate runic inscriptions provide linguistic evidence for Valkyrie terminology during the migration period. The Sealand Bracteate contains the inscription Walkyrja, representing the earliest written form of the word that would develop into Old Norse Valkyria. The term's consistent appearance across different Bracteate finds demonstrates the widespread distribution of Valkyrie concepts throughout the Germanic cultural sphere before the Viking Age consolidation of Norse mythology. The runic evidence supports the antiquity of Valkyrie beliefs, while documenting their integration into broader systems of divine nomenclature. The evolution from battlefield spirits to divine handmaidens reflects broader changes in Germanic religious concepts during the transition from migration period warrior bands to more sophisticated early medieval kingdoms. The earliest literary references in Anglo-Saxon poetry present Valkyries as terrifying supernatural predators who devour battlefield casualties. The Battle of Maldon describes choosers of the slain as wolf-like creatures that tear flesh from corpses, while the Exeter book contains references to battle ravens, with female characteristics who consume the eyes and hearts of dead warriors. Continental Germanic sources from the 8th and 9th centuries show intermediate stages in Valkyrie evolution where battlefield predator imagery coexists with more benevolent protective functions. The Old High German Merseburg charms mention Idisi, supernatural women who can bind or release warriors during combat, suggesting divine females possessed authority over battle outcomes rather than simply scavenging after conflicts ended. The Langobardic Origo Gentis Langobardrum describes Freya and her maidens influencing battle results through strategic interventions, indicating that Germanic peoples across different regions developed similar concepts about female divine involvement in warfare. The transformation accelerated during the 9th and 10th centuries as Scandinavian political structures became more centralised and warfare more organised. The development of professional warrior bands serving royal courts created demand for more sophisticated theological explanations of military service and death in battle. Valkyries evolved to fill this explanatory gap by providing divine sanction for warrior culture while offering consolation for battlefield losses through promises of continued service in Valhalla. The individual Valkyrie figures documented in skaldic and Eddic poetry reveal the complexity of their mythological development and their specific connections to Valhalla's warrior recruitment system. Brynhild represents the most fully developed Valkyrie character in Norse literature, appearing in multiple poem cycles that trace her evolution from divine servant to tragic heroine. The Volsunga saga presents her as a Valkyrie punished by Odin for disobeying his battle selection commands, transformed from divine agent into mortal woman as punishment for excessive independence. Brynhild's disobedience involved protecting a warrior whom Odin had marked for death, reflecting theological tensions between divine will and individual moral judgment. Her punishment, imprisonment within a ring of fire until a worthy hero could claim her, transforms her from active agent of divine will into passive recipient of male heroic action. This narrative pattern suggests that Valkyrie mythology addressed contemporary concerns about female authority and autonomy within warrior culture, providing cautionary examples about the consequences of challenging divine or masculine authority. The Brynhild narrative cycle demonstrates Valkyrie connections to Valhalla through her intimate knowledge of Einherjar selection criteria and afterlife conditions. Her conversations with Sigurd reveal detailed information about Odin's preferences for warrior recruits, including his favoritism for fighters who continue battling despite hopeless odds. She describes Valhalla's daily routine with authority that suggests personal experience, indicating that Valkyries possessed insider knowledge of divine institutions that enabled them to function as reliable guides for prospective Einherjar. Brynhild's magical abilities include the power to determine battle outcomes through runic spells and protective charms, connecting Valkyrie authority to the broader system of Germanic magic and divination. Her teaching of battle runes to Sigurd demonstrates that Valkyries served educational functions beyond simple warrior selection, transmitting specialized military knowledge that enhanced mortal combat effectiveness. This pedagogical role suggests that Valkyries functioned as intermediaries between divine wisdom and human application, making them essential components of the theological system that connected earthly warfare to cosmic purposes. Sigrun appears in the Helgi poems as a Valkyrie whose love for the hero Helgi creates conflicts between personal desire and divine duty. Her relationship with Helgi begins when she selects him for death in battle, but her attraction to his martial prowess leads her to protect rather than collect him. This narrative explores the tension between Valkyrie professional obligations and individual emotional responses, suggesting that even divine beings experienced conflicts between duty and personal preference. The Sigrun-Helgi relationship demonstrates Valkyrie authority over life and death through her ability to postpone Helgi's destined death through magical protection. Her interventions enable him to survive multiple battles where he should have died, indicating that Valkyries possessed considerable discretionary authority in implementing Odin's selection decisions. This flexibility in divine administration suggests that the mythological system accommodated individual agency within predetermined cosmic patterns. Sigrun's continued relationship with Helgi after his eventual death illustrates Valkyrie connections to the boundary between life and death. She visits his burial mound for nocturnal meetings, where they resume their earthly relationship in spiritual form, demonstrating that Valkyrie authority extended beyond the moment of death to encompass ongoing relationships with the deceased. These supernatural visitations suggest that Valkyries served as permanent intermediaries between living and dead, rather than simply functioning as one-time psychopomps. The poem cycle presents Sigrun's eventual fate as transformation into a new Valkyrie identity, Kara, who serves Helgi's reincarnated form in subsequent adventures. This recycling of Valkyrie personas through multiple heroic generations indicates that individual Valkyrie identities possessed flexibility that enabled them to adapt to changing mythological requirements while maintaining essential characteristics. The reincarnation pattern also suggests that Valkyrie-hero relationships possessed cosmic significance that transcended individual lifetimes. Svava represents the most ancient Valkyrie figure in Norse literature, appearing in poems that preserve archaic features absent from later Valkyrie developments. Her name derives from the Old Norse verb svær, meaning to sleep or to die, connecting her directly to death-bringing functions that characterized early Valkyrie concepts. The first lay of Helgi Hundingsbane presents her as a more primitive figure than either Brynhild or Sigrun, emphasizing her supernatural nature through bird transformation abilities and prophetic powers. Svava's relationship with the hero Helgi Hjorvardsson demonstrates early Valkyrie selection procedures where personal attraction influenced divine decision-making. Her choice to protect rather than collect Helgi reflects individual agency within divine service. But the poem presents this decision as natural rather than transgressive, suggesting that earlier Valkyrie concepts allowed greater personal discretion than later systematized versions. This flexibility indicates that primitive Valkyrie mythology emphasized individual relationships over institutional obligations. The poem describes Svave's transformation between human and bird forms during battle, where she appears as a swan or raven to observe combat while maintaining her beautiful woman appearance for interactions with chosen heroes. These shape-shifting abilities connect her to broader Germanic traditions about supernatural women who possessed animal characteristics, particularly birds associated with battlefields and death. The transformation imagery suggests that Valkyries existed at the boundary between human and animal realms, possessing characteristics of both without being limited to either. Svave's prophetic abilities enable her to warn Helgi about future dangers and provide strategic advice for upcoming battles. Her foreknowledge derives from divine sources that remain mysterious within the poem, but her accurate predictions demonstrate supernatural access to information unavailable to mortal intelligence. This prophetic function suggests that Valkyries served as divine communication channels that transmitted cosmic knowledge to earthly heroes, making them essential components of the information systems that connected divine and mortal realms. Archaeological evidence for Valkyrie worship extends beyond bracteates and figurines to include runestone depictions that document the integration of Valkyrie imagery into public memorial contexts. The Ramsund runestone in Södermanland depicts scenes from the Sigurd legend that include a female figure offering a drinking horn to the hero. The figure's elaborate dress and prominent position within the carved narrative suggest divine status, while her association with the drinking horn connects her to Valkyrie's serving functions within Valhalla's feasting halls. The Gok runestone from Södermanland contains runic inscriptions that invoke Valkyrie protection for the deceased warrior commemorated by the monument. The inscription requests that Valkyries guide him to the bright bridge, likely referring to Bifrost, indicating popular belief in Valkyrie psychopomp functions that extended beyond elite warrior circles. The runestone evidence demonstrates that Valkyrie concepts influenced memorial practices among ordinary farmers and landowners rather than remaining confined to aristocratic warrior culture. Gotland picture stones from the 8th through 10th centuries provide extensive visual evidence for Valkyrie iconography in domestic contexts. The Ardris VIII stone depicts multiple female figures with elaborate hairstyles and long dresses attending to warriors in various scenes that appear to represent different stages of heroic careers. Some figures offer drinking horns, while others hold weapons, suggesting functional specialization within Valkyrie hierarchies that paralleled the systematic organization described in later literary sources. The Labro Tangelgada stone contains the most detailed Valkyrie representation in Scandinavian stone carving, showing a female figure with bird wings carrying a drinking horn above a ship filled with warriors. The combination of flight capability with serving functions demonstrates the integration of earlier bird spirit concepts with later handmaiden imagery, creating composite Valkyrie identities that preserved archaic elements within evolving mythological frameworks. The ship context connects the scene to death journey concepts that parallel Valhalla's role as destination for warrior souls. Amulets and personal ornaments provide evidence for individual Valkyrie devotion among both male and female populations throughout Scandinavia. Silver pendant from 9th century contexts in Norway and Denmark display female figures with spears and drinking horns, suggesting that both warriors and their families sought Valkyrie protection and favour. The widespread distribution of these personal items indicates that Valkyrie worship extended beyond public ceremonial context to encompass private devotional practices. The transformation of Valkyrie imagery from fierce battle demons to noble shield maidens reflects broader cultural changes in medieval Scandinavian society as Christian influences modified traditional mythological concepts. The earliest literary sources present Valkyries as terrifying supernatural predators whose primary function involved consuming battlefield casualties. The Anglo-Saxon Exodus describes choosers of the slain as wolf-like creatures with iron teeth who devour corpses, while early skaldic poetry employs kennings that emphasise Valkyrie associations with carrion-feeding animals. The gradual refinement of Valkyrie imagery parallels the development of courtly culture in medieval Scandinavia, where aristocratic women gained increased social prominence and influence. The transformation from battlefield scavengers to elegant serving women reflects contemporary ideals about feminine behaviour and appropriate female roles within warrior society. This evolution demonstrates how mythological concepts adapted to changing social conditions while maintaining essential religious and cultural functions. The medieval literary presentation of Valkyries as beautiful, noble women wearing elaborate clothing and jewellery contrasts sharply with earlier depictions that emphasised their monstrous or animal characteristics. Snorri's systematic description in the Prose Edda presents Valkyries as dignified divine servants whose appearance reflects their elevated status within Odin's court. This idealisation process removed threatening elements from Valkyrie imagery while preserving their essential functions as divine agents and warrior guides. The preservation of earlier Valkyrie characteristics within later literary contexts suggests that the transformation process involved layering rather than replacement of mythological elements. Medieval sources retain references to Valkyrie bird forms and supernatural abilities while emphasising their human-like appearance and behaviour. This synthetic approach enabled the mythology to accommodate both archaic religious concepts and contemporary social ideals without completely abandoning either tradition. The selection of warriors for Valhalla operated according to complex criteria that distinguished between different categories of battle dead and their appropriate afterlife destinations. While popular understanding often assumes that all warriors killed in combat automatically gained admission to Odin's Hall, the mythological sources reveal a sophisticated sorting system that evaluated multiple factors beyond mere battlefield death. The primary division separated those destined for Valhalla under Odin's direct authority from warriors assigned to Folkvanga, the hall ruled by the goddess Freyja, creating parallel institutions that serve different divine purposes within the cosmic order. The distinction between Valhalla and Folkvanga reflects fundamental theological concepts about divine authority and military organisation in Norse cosmology. Freyja, as leader of the Vanir deities integrated into the Aesir pantheon, maintained independent recruiting rights that enabled her to claim half of all battle dead before Odin's Valkyries could evaluate them for Valhalla admission. This division prevented any single divine authority from monopolising warrior recruitment, while ensuring that both major divine factions possessed adequate military resources for Ragnarök. The Grimnismal explicitly states that Freyja chooses half the slain each day, indicating that the selection process involved active competition between divine recruiters rather than simple administrative division of casualties. The criteria governing assignment to Folkvanga versus Valhalla emphasised different aspects of warrior virtue and divine preference. Freyja's selections prioritised warriors who died defending their families, communities, or religious sites, reflecting her associations with fertility, protection, and domestic prosperity. These fighters typically included farmers defending their lands, local militia protecting villages, and warriors who died in defensive rather than aggressive military actions. The emphasis on protective rather than predatory warfare aligned with Freyja's broader mythological functions as guardian of life-giving forces and social stability. Odin's selections for Valhalla focused on warriors whose deaths demonstrated exceptional martial prowess, strategic thinking, or willingness to sacrifice personal safety for military objectives. The Einherjar typically included professional warriors, elite bodyguards, successful raiders, and military leaders whose tactical innovations or personal courage distinguished them from ordinary fighters. The selection criteria emphasised individual achievement and combat effectiveness, rather than moral virtue or social responsibility, reflecting Odin's role as patron of war bands and military excellence, rather than community protection. The competitive nature of divine recruitment created complex situations where multiple deities might claim the same fallen warrior based on different aspects of their death circumstances. A warrior who died defending his village while displaying exceptional individual combat skills might qualify for either Folkvanger or Valhalla, depending on which divine recruiter arrived first or which criterion received priority in the specific case. The mythological sources suggest that such disputes were resolved through negotiation between divine authorities, rather than rigid application of predetermined rules. Archaeological evidence from Viking Age burial sites reveals material correlates for these theological distinctions through different treatment of warrior graves that may reflect beliefs about their afterlife destinations. Burials containing complete weapon sets, horses and ships typically correspond to warriors deemed worthy of Valhalla, while graves emphasizing domestic tools, agricultural implements, and family-oriented grave goods might represent those destined for Folkvanger. The Birka Cemetery complex contains examples of both burial types within the same chronological period, suggesting that contemporary communities recognized multiple categories of warrior afterlife. The daily routine within Valhalla followed a precisely structured schedule that combined intense military training with elaborate social festivities, creating an existence that fulfilled warrior ideals while preparing the Einherjar for their ultimate purpose in cosmic warfare. Each day began before dawn with the sound of Gjallarhorn echoing through the hall's vast interior, awakening the warriors from sleep that restored their strength without diminishing their eagerness for combat. The horn's blast, blown by Heimdall from his position at Bifrost's Rainbow Bridge, served both practical and symbolic functions by coordinating activities across Valhalla's enormous space, while reminding the Einherjar of their connection to the broader divine realm. The morning armament ritual demonstrated Valhalla's supernatural nature through the automatic appearance of weapons and armour beside each warrior's sleeping place. These items surpassed earthly military equipment in every aspect: swords that maintained perfect sharpness regardless of use, spears that flew unerringly to their targets, axes that could cleave through any material, and shields that provided complete protection without restricting movement. The weapon's supernatural properties ensured that training exercises achieved maximum educational value while eliminating practical concerns about equipment maintenance, replacement, or availability that constrained earthly military forces. The Einherjar's armour consisted of mail shirts woven from rings of imperishable metal that provided complete protection while weighing no more than ordinary clothing. Helmets crafted from precious metals bore decorative elements that identified each warrior's earthly origins, military specializations, and notable battlefield achievements, creating visual systems that facilitated organization and recognition within Valhalla's massive population. The armor's supernatural properties included automatic sizing adjustments that ensured perfect fit regardless of the wearer's physical dimensions, accommodating warriors from different historical periods and cultural backgrounds within standardized equipment systems. The morning combat exercises followed systematic patterns designed to maintain and enhance the Einherjar's military skills through progressively challenging scenarios that replicated every conceivable battlefield situation. Individual weapons training occupied the first several hours after dawn, with warriors practicing sword techniques, spear work, archery and axe fighting under the supervision of veteran Einherjar who had mastered these skills through centuries of daily practice. The training areas extended across vast courtyards surrounding Valhalla's main structure, providing adequate space for thousands of simultaneous individual exercises without interference or crowding. The weapons training emphasized techniques specific to the cosmic warfare expected during Ragnarök, including methods for fighting supernatural enemies whose capabilities exceeded those of mortal opponents. The Einherjar learned to combat giants whose size and strength dwarfed human limitations, dragons whose breath could melt conventional armor, and shape-shifting enemies whose forms changed unpredictably during battle. These specialised techniques required modifications of standard fighting methods that earthly warriors never encountered, making Valhalla's training regimen essential preparation for cosmic combat conditions. Unit formation exercises occupied the middle portion of each day's training schedule, where groups of Einherjar practiced coordinated manoeuvres that would prove essential during Ragnarok's large-scale battles. These exercises included cavalry charges using supernatural horses that could travel instantly across any terrain, infantry formations designed to maintain cohesion against overwhelming numerical odds, and combined arms tactics that integrated different weapon types into unified combat systems. The formations accommodated warriors from different historical periods, whose earthly military experience involved varying tactical doctrines and technological capabilities. The most distinctive aspect of Valhalla's training involved combat sessions, where Einherjar fought each other with full intensity until death, then immediately resurrected to continue their activities without permanent injury or psychological trauma. This practice enabled warriors to experience the complete spectrum of combat situations, including their own deaths, without the permanent consequences that limited earthly training effectiveness. The daily death and resurrection cycle served multiple purposes. It maintained combat edge through constant exposure to mortal danger, eliminated fear of death that could compromise battlefield performance, and demonstrated divine power over mortality that reinforced the Einherjar's confidence in their supernatural status. The resurrection process occurred instantaneously upon death, with fallen warriors immediately returning to full health and vigour without memory of pain or suffering from their fatal wounds. This supernatural healing eliminated the psychological trauma typically associated with violent death, while preserving the educational value of experiencing combat's ultimate consequences. The Einherjar retained complete tactical memory of their deaths, enabling them to analyse their mistakes and improve their performance in subsequent training sessions. The combat exercises included scenarios designed to replicate specific threats expected during Ragnarok, based on prophetic knowledge available to Odin through his ravens, his eight-legged horse Sleipnir's travels, and his personal reconnaissance missions throughout the Nine Worlds. The Einherjar practiced fighting the wolf Fenrir, whose size and ferocity exceeded any earthly predator, the Midgard serpent Jormungandr, whose poison breath could kill even divine beings, and the fire giant Surta, whose flaming sword could destroy entire worlds. These specialised training scenarios required tactical innovations and equipment modifications that distinguished Ragnarok warfare from ordinary military conflicts. The evening transition from combat training to festive celebration demonstrated Valhalla's dual nature as both military installation and social paradise, where the same warriors who spent their days in deadly combat gathered each evening for elaborate feasts that reinforced their bonds of fellowship and shared purpose. The transformation from battlefield to banquet hall occurred automatically at sunset, when the training areas cleared and the Einherjar assembled within Valhalla's main structure for meals that combined supernatural abundance with ceremonial dignity appropriate to their divine status. The evening feast centred around consumption of the boar Symbolism, whose flesh provided unlimited meat through daily regeneration that ensured every warrior received adequate nourishment, regardless of Valhalla's enormous population. The boar's supernatural nature enabled it to feed millions of Einherjar each evening, while returning to life each morning for the next day's slaughter, creating a renewable food source that eliminated scarcity from Valhalla's economy. The meat possessed supernatural properties that satisfied hunger completely, while providing strength and vigour that enhanced the warrior's combat capabilities. The preparation and serving of Sehrimnir followed elaborate ceremonial procedures that honoured the boar's sacrifice while demonstrating proper respect for the divine gift of unlimited sustenance. The cook and Hrimnir possessed supernatural culinary skills that ensured perfect preparation regardless of the quantity required, while the serving process involved hundreds of Valkyries who distributed portions according to strict protocols that reflected military hierarchy and social status within the Einherjar community. The ceremonial aspects transformed simple feeding into religious observance that reinforced theological concepts about divine providence and warrior worthiness. The mead service provided by the goat Heidrun complemented the meat course through unlimited supplies of fermented honey beverage that possessed supernatural properties enhancing fellowship and martial spirit. The goat's udders produced streams of mead rather than milk, creating an endless supply of alcoholic refreshment that eliminated concerns about quantity or quality control. The mead's supernatural nature enabled warriors to consume large quantities without experiencing negative effects such as impaired judgment, physical weakness, or behavioural problems that affected mortal drinkers. The mead-serving Valkyries operated according to sophisticated hierarchical systems that reflected both their divine status and the military organisation of Valhalla's population. Senior Valkyries like Skuld, Gondel and Hilda served Odin and the most distinguished Einherjar at elevated tables that provided clear views of the entire hall, while junior Valkyries attended to the general warrior population throughout the building's vast interior spaces. The serving procedures followed precise etiquette rules that demonstrated respect for martial achievement while maintaining appropriate ceremonial dignity. The military hierarchy within Valhalla reflected both earthly accomplishments and performance during divine service, creating organisational systems that accommodated warriors from different historical periods, while maintaining effective command structures for cosmic warfare. The highest-ranking Einherjar included legendary heroes whose earthly exploits earned them permanent positions of authority within Valhalla's military organisation. These figures served as unit commanders, training supervisors, and strategic advisors whose experience and proven leadership capabilities qualified them for continued command responsibilities in the afterlife. Sigurd the Dragon Slayer occupied a position of particular prominence within Valhalla's hierarchy due to his exceptional combat achievements and his intimate knowledge of supernatural enemies that the Einherjar would face during Ragnarök. His successful battle against the dragon Fafnir provided crucial intelligence about draconic combat techniques and vulnerabilities that informed training programs for other warriors. His leadership of specialized dragon fighting units within Valhalla's military organization demonstrated how individual expertise translated into institutional knowledge that enhanced overall combat effectiveness. Starkadr the Old commanded units specializing in prolonged combat operations due to his earthly reputation for fighting multiple opponents simultaneously over extended periods. His supernatural longevity and combat endurance made him ideal for training Einherjar in the stamina and tactical flexibility required for Ragnarok's anticipated lengthy battles. His experience with different weapon types and fighting styles across multiple generations of earthly warfare provided comprehensive knowledge that enhanced training program effectiveness. The integration of warriors from different historical periods created unique organizational challenges that required sophisticated solutions, accommodating varying military technologies, tactical doctrines, and cultural expectations. Bronze Age warriors needed training in iron weapons, while early medieval fighters required instruction in specialized techniques for supernatural opponents. The hierarchy accommodated these differences through specialized training units that preserved valuable traditional knowledge while ensuring all Einherjar achieved competency in standardized combat methods. The psychological significance of eternal warrior training extended beyond simple military preparation to encompass fundamental questions about identity, purpose, and meaning within cosmic frameworks that transcended individual mortality. The Einherjar's daily routine provided clear structure and purpose that eliminated existential uncertainty while offering unlimited opportunities for skill development and social advancement based on merit and achievement. The combination of challenging training, meaningful fellowship, and divine purpose created psychological conditions that fulfilled warrior aspirations while serving broader cosmic functions. The elimination of death as a permanent consequence transformed the psychological experience of combat from anxiety-provoking survival struggle into educational opportunity that enhanced rather than threatened personal development. The Einherjar could explore their full combat potential without fear of permanent injury or death, enabling psychological growth and tactical innovation that earthly limitations prevented. This psychological freedom enhanced both individual performance and unit cohesion by removing competitive tensions and survival anxieties that disrupted earthly military organisations. The cultural significance of Valhalla's training regimen reflected broader Germanic values about warrior virtue, social obligation, and cosmic participation that connected individual actions to universal purposes. The Einherjar's preparation for Ragnarök transformed personal combat skills into contributions to cosmic order maintenance, elevating individual warrior identity into participation in divine purposes that transcended temporal limitations. This cultural framework provided meaning and dignity to martial activities that might otherwise appear as mere violence or aggression. The eternal nature of the preparation process emphasized Germanic concepts about cyclical time and cosmic renewal that connected individual warrior service to universal patterns of creation, destruction, and regeneration. The Einherjar's daily cycle of combat, death, and resurrection mirrored cosmic cycles of seasonal change, generational succession, and universal renewal that characterized Germanic cosmological thinking. This temporal framework transformed individual warrior training into participation in eternal patterns that connected mortal actions to immortal purposes. The transition from mythological concepts to material reality becomes tangible through archaeological discoveries that reveal how Valhalla beliefs shaped physical practices across Scandinavia during the migration period and early Viking Age. The excavation of great halls, weapon deposits, burial sites, and carved monuments provides concrete evidence for the cultural importance of warrior afterlife concepts that found their ultimate expression in Odin's mythical hall. These material remains demonstrate that Valhalla represented more than literary fantasy. It reflected deeply held beliefs about death, honour, and cosmic purpose that influenced how Germanic peoples structured their societies, conducted their rituals, and commemorated their dead. The Great Hall excavations at Upper Skane provide the most comprehensive archaeological evidence for the physical manifestations of beliefs that would crystallize into Valhalla mythology. This remarkable site, occupied continuously from the 1st century BC through the 10th century AD, contained a succession of timber halls that grew progressively larger and more elaborate over nearly a millennium of use. The final hall measured 52 metres in length and 12 metres in width, creating an interior space capable of accommodating over 300 people for feasting and ceremonial activities. The building's massive oak posts, some measuring over a metre in diameter, supported a roof structure that rose to heights exceeding 15 metres, creating an architectural monument that dominated the surrounding landscape. The Upper Hall's interior contained stratified deposits of material culture that document centuries of ritual activity directly relevant to Valhalla concepts. The floor layers yielded thousands of weapon fragments, including sword hilts, spear points, shield bosses, and arrowheads that had been deliberately deposited during ceremonial events. Many of these weapons showed evidence of ritual destruction, bent blades, broken points, and crushed fittings that paralleled the killing of grave goods found in contemporary burial contexts. The weapon deposits appeared concentrated around the hall's central hearth and near the high seat area, suggesting that ritual destruction of military equipment formed part of regular ceremonial observances. Animal bone deposits within the Upper Hall revealed feasting practices that directly paralleled descriptions of Valhalla's supernatural abundance. Archaeological analysis identified remains from hundreds of cattle, pigs, sheep, and horses that had been butchered and consumed during large-scale communal meals. The bone assemblages showed evidence for systematic meat distribution that ensured all participants received appropriate portions regardless of the feast's size, creating earthly approximations of the unlimited sustenance provided by Sarimnir in Odin's hall. The recurring pattern of massive animal sacrifice and consumption demonstrated that hall-based feasting formed a central element of Germanic religious practice. The discovery of complete horse skeletons buried beneath the Upper Hall's foundation provides direct archaeological evidence for beliefs about supernatural transportation that connected earthly halls to divine counterparts. These horses, buried with full riding equipment including bits, stirrups and decorative harness fittings, appear to have been sacrificed during the hall's construction to provide spiritual transportation for the building's occupants. The practice parallels mythological descriptions of the eight-legged horse Sleipnir and the supernatural mounts used by Valkyries to travel between earthly battlefields and Valhalla. The Gudma complex on Funen represents another crucial archaeological site where material evidence illuminates the relationship between earthly halls and divine prototypes. This settlement, active from the 3rd through 10th centuries AD, contained multiple great halls surrounded by extensive craft production areas and ritual deposits that suggest it functioned as a major religious and political centre. The site's name derives from the Old Norse Gud, meaning god, and Heim, meaning home, indicating that medieval Scandinavians recognised its sacred character long after its abandonment. The Gudma halls displayed architectural features that directly corresponded to literary descriptions of divine buildings. The largest structure measured over 60 metres in length and featured elaborate carved posts decorated with interlaced animal designs that paralleled the artistic motifs found on contemporary metalwork and stone carvings. The building's interior contained raised platforms at both ends that provided elevated seating for high-status individuals, creating spatial hierarchies that matched descriptions of Valhalla's seating arrangements, where the most distinguished Einherjar occupied positions near Odin's high seat. The ritual deposits surrounding the Gudma halls included some of the largest concentrations of gold objects ever discovered in Scandinavia. Over 1.5 kilograms of gold artefacts, including bracteates, arm rings, and miniature weapons, were found scattered throughout the site's occupation layers. Many of these objects showed evidence of deliberate destruction or deformation before deposition, suggesting they had been killed to transfer their spiritual essence to divine realms. The gold's exceptional purity and the sophisticated craftsmanship of individual pieces indicate that these deposits represented enormous wealth deliberately removed from circulation for religious purposes. The weapon deposits at Gudma included complete sets of military equipment that had been carefully arranged before burial in specific locations around the hall complex. One deposit contained 15 swords, 30 spearheads, 12 shield bosses, and numerous arrow points arranged in precise geometric patterns that suggested ritual significance beyond simple disposal of damaged equipment. The weapons' high quality and excellent preservation indicated they were functional items deliberately sacrificed, rather than worn-out equipment discarded after use. The systematic arrangement and exceptional preservation suggest these deposits were intended to equip divine warriors in the afterlife. Archaeological investigation of migration period, weapon deposits in Scandinavian bogs and lakes reveal systematic patterns of ritual offering that directly relate to beliefs about warrior afterlife and divine military service. These deposits, numbering in the hundreds across Denmark, southern Sweden, and Norway, contain thousands of weapons that were deliberately destroyed and thrown into water during ceremonial events spanning several centuries. The scale and consistency of these practices demonstrate that weapon sacrifice formed a central element of Germanic religious observance that connected earthly military activities to cosmic warfare. The Ilarapadal deposits in Jutland provide the most comprehensive evidence for systematic weapon sacrifice related to warrior afterlife beliefs. This site contained the remains of at least 4 separate armies' worth of military equipment deposited over a period of 150 years during the 2nd through 4th centuries AD. Each deposit contained 300 complete weapon sets that had been systematically destroyed through bending, breaking and crushing before being thrown into the bog. The weapons included swords with elaborately decorated hilts, spears with silver inlays, and shields with bronze fittings that represented the finest military equipment available to Germanic warriors. The ritual destruction patterns at Ilarapadal followed specific procedures that transformed functional weapons into spiritual offerings suitable for divine recipients. Sword blades were bent into S-curves or figure-8 patterns that rendered them useless for earthly combat, while creating symbolic forms that may have possessed magical significance. Spear points were snapped from their shafts, and the wooden handles were split lengthwise, separating the weapon's components in ways that paralleled the separation of soul from body at death. Shield bosses were crushed flat, and their wooden backing boards were broken into fragments, completing the transformation from protective equipment into ritual offering. The Vimmersborg deposits in Denmark revealed evidence for ceremonial procedures that accompanied weapon sacrifice, and connected these practices to broader beliefs about divine warfare. The site contained not only destroyed weapons, but also personal ornaments, tools, and clothing that had been deposited alongside the military equipment. The inclusion of complete costume sets suggests that the offerings represented entire warriors rather than simply their equipment, indicating beliefs that weapon sacrifice could transfer complete military units to divine service. The ceremonial aspects of these deposits parallel mythological descriptions of how Valkyries selected and transported fallen warriors to Valhalla. The Thorsberg bog in Schleswig contained weapon deposits that included runic inscriptions, providing direct evidence for the religious motivations behind these practices. Several spearheads bore runic texts that identified them as offerings to specific deities, including inscriptions that may reference Odin in his role as leader of the divine warband. The runic evidence demonstrates that weapon sacrifice was conducted with explicit religious purposes rather than representing simple disposal of damaged equipment or symbolic burial of defeated enemies. The geographical distribution of bog deposits follows major river systems and ancient travel routes, suggesting that weapon sacrifice occurred at locations that possess special significance as boundaries between earthly and divine realms. Many sites occupy positions near important political centres or at confluences of major waterways where different tribal territories met. The strategic positioning of these ritual locations indicates that weapon sacrifice served political and diplomatic functions in addition to religious purposes, creating neutral ground where different groups could participate in common ceremonial activities. The Gotland picture stones provide the most extensive visual evidence for beliefs about warrior afterlife and divine halls that directly relate to Valhalla concepts. These carved limestone monuments, erected between the 5th and 12th centuries AD, display complex narrative scenes that combine mythological themes with contemporary cultural practices. Over 400 picture stones survive on Gotland, with approximately 40 containing imagery that appears to depict scenes related to warrior death, divine transportation, and afterlife destinations that correspond to literary descriptions of Valhalla. The Ardred Eighth stone presents the most comprehensive visual narrative of warrior afterlife beliefs through its multi-panel composition that traces the journey from earthly death to divine destination. The stone's lower panel depicts a battle scene where warriors fight with swords and spears, while ravens and eagles circle overhead, establishing the connection between combat death and supernatural attention. The middle panel shows a ship filled with armed figures sailing across stylized waves, representing the transportation of battle dead to their afterlife destination. The upper panel displays a large building with multiple doorways and figures holding drinking horns, creating a visual representation of a divine hall that corresponds closely to literary descriptions of Valhalla. The Labro Tangelgarda stone contains imagery that specifically relates to Valkyrie activities and their role in warrior selection. The carving shows a female figure with elaborate braided hair and a long dress riding an 8-legged horse above a ship filled with warriors. The rider carries a drinking horn in one hand and appears to be offering it to the ship's occupants, creating a scene that combines Valkyrie transportation functions with their serving duties within Valhalla. The 8-legged horse clearly references Sleipnir, Odin's supernatural mount, suggesting that the female figure represents a Valkyrie operating under direct divine authority. The Alskog Tjangvidda stone depicts a warrior's arrival at what appears to be a divine hall through imagery that combines architectural and ceremonial elements. The carving shows a large building with elaborate doorways and decorative elements that suggest supernatural rather than earthly construction. Figures within the building hold drinking horns and weapons, indicating that the structure serves both military and social functions. A prominent female figure offers a drinking horn to a newly arrived warrior, creating a scene that parallels literary descriptions of Valkyrie welcoming ceremonies for Einherjar entering Valhalla. The Sander Stone contains unique imagery showing warriors engaged in combat within what appears to be a hall setting, providing visual evidence for the daily battle training that characterized life in Valhalla, according to literary sources. The carved scene shows multiple figures fighting with various weapons, while architectural elements frame the action, suggesting that combat occurred within rather than outside the Divine Hall. The warriors display no signs of permanent injury despite their intense fighting, supporting literary descriptions of daily resurrection that enabled continuous training without lasting consequences. The chronological development of picture stone imagery reveals the evolution of Valhalla concepts over several centuries as beliefs became more systematized and elaborate. Earlier stones from the 5th through 7th centuries display relatively simple scenes of warrior death and supernatural transportation, while later examples from the 9th through 11th centuries show increasingly complex narratives that incorporate multiple mythological elements within unified compositions. This artistic development parallels the literary evolution from fragmentary poetic references to systematic prose descriptions in Snorri's Edda. The analysis of grave goods patterns in elite warrior burials provides crucial evidence for how beliefs about warrior afterlife influenced funerary practices throughout Scandinavia during the Migration period and Viking Age. The systematic examination of burial assemblages reveals consistent patterns in the selection, arrangement, and treatment of objects placed with deceased warriors, demonstrating that funeral practices reflected specific beliefs about the requirements and conditions of afterlife existence that corresponded to Valhalla concepts. The Valsgard cemetery complex in Uppland contains a series of boat burials spanning the 6th through 10th centuries that demonstrate the evolution of warrior burial practices in response to developing afterlife beliefs. The earliest burials contained relatively simple assemblages of weapons, personal ornaments, and domestic equipment, arranged within wooden boats that served as coffins. Later burials displayed increasingly elaborate grave goods arrangements that included complete household assemblages, gaming pieces, and imported luxury items that suggested beliefs about maintaining earthly lifestyle patterns in the afterlife. The Vendel Cemetery provides parallel evidence for elite warrior burial practices that reflected beliefs about divine military service after death. The site's boat burials contained weapon assemblages that exceeded practical military requirements, including multiple swords, dozens of spears, and elaborate helmets decorated with scenes of divine warfare. The excessive quantity and exceptional quality of military equipment suggests that these items were intended to equip the deceased for supernatural rather than earthly combat, supporting beliefs about continued warrior service in divine halls. The distribution patterns of grave goods within individual burials reveal systematic arrangements that reflected beliefs about afterlife organization and hierarchy. Weapons typically occupied positions near the deceased's right hand or along the body's length, maintaining the spatial relationships that characterize living warrior equipment arrangements. Personal ornaments and drinking vessels were placed near the head or chest area, suggesting their importance for social recognition and ceremonial participation in the afterlife. The careful positioning of grave goods indicates that burial assemblages were intended to recreate complete warrior identity rather than simply honouring the deceased's memory. The ritual treatment of weapons in warrior burials paralleled the destruction practices documented in bog deposits, suggesting shared beliefs about the transformation required for earthly objects to function in divine realms. Many burial weapons showed evidence of deliberate damage, bent sword blades, broken spear points, or crushed shield bosses that rendered them non-functional for earthly use, while potentially enabling their spiritual transportation to supernatural destinations. The systematic nature of this destruction indicates that weapon killing formed an essential element of proper funeral procedure rather than representing accidental damage or enemy action. The inclusion of gaming pieces in warrior burials provides evidence for beliefs about recreational activities that would continue in the afterlife, supporting literary descriptions of social fellowship that complemented military training in Valhalla. Archaeological analysis has identified over 200 gaming sets from Scandinavian warrior graves, including elaborate examples with pieces carved from amber, jet, and precious metals. The game's complexity and the skill required for their manufacture suggest that gaming formed an important element of aristocratic culture that warriors expected to continue after death. The presence of complete horse skeletons in warrior burials demonstrates beliefs about supernatural transportation that connected earthly death to divine destinations. These horses, typically buried with full riding equipment including bits, stirrups and decorative harness fittings, appear to have been sacrificed to provide transportation for the deceased's journey to the afterlife. The practice directly parallels mythological descriptions of supernatural horses used by Valkyries and divine messengers to travel between different cosmic realms, suggesting that earthly burial practices attempted to replicate divine transportation systems. Human sacrifice evidence in elite warrior burials provides the most direct archaeological support for beliefs about retinue service that would continue in divine halls. Several Scandinavian burial sites contain evidence for the deliberate killing of servants, retainers or slaves who were buried alongside their masters to provide continued service in the afterlife. The Oseberg ship burial contained 2 female skeletons that showed signs of violent death, while several male warrior graves included additional human remains that appear to represent sacrificed attendants. These practices suggest beliefs that social relationships and service obligations would continue in the afterlife, supporting literary descriptions of hierarchical organisation within Valhalla. The archaeological evidence for warrior afterlife beliefs extends far beyond Scandinavia proper, revealing a complex network of interconnected Germanic traditions that shared fundamental concepts while developing distinctive regional characteristics. The Gothic migrations across Eastern Europe during the 3rd and 4th centuries carried warrior cult practices from their Scandinavian origins into territories stretching from the Black Sea to the Iberian Peninsula, creating archaeological signatures that demonstrate both cultural continuity and adaptive modification. The Cherniakov culture sites associated with Gothic settlement patterns contain burial assemblages that preserve recognisable elements of Northern Germanic warrior afterlife beliefs, while incorporating local influences from Sarmatian, Dacian and Roman cultural traditions. The Pietra Asel treasure from Romania, discovered in association with a Gothic princely burial, contains gold vessels decorated with scenes that parallel Scandinavian mythological imagery while displaying distinctively Eastern European artistic influences. The treasure's centrepiece, a massive gold tray weighing over 1.5 kilograms, depicts figures engaged in ritual activities around what appears to be a large hall structure. The architectural details include elevated platforms, carved posts, and ceremonial hearths that correspond closely to archaeological evidence from Scandinavian great halls, suggesting that Gothic elites maintained traditional concepts about divine hall architecture despite their geographical separation from Scandinavian cultural centres. The Gothic historian Jordanes, writing in the 6th century, preserved traditions about warrior afterlife beliefs that demonstrate continuity with Scandinavian concepts while reflecting Gothic cultural adaptations. His account describes Gothic warriors who died in battle joining the ancestral heroes in eternal combat, where they prepare for a final cosmic battle against the forces of chaos. The terminology employed in these descriptions includes cognates of Scandinavian mythological vocabulary, indicating that Gothic oral traditions preserved linguistic connections to their northern origins despite centuries of geographical separation and cultural contact with non-Germanic populations. Archaeological evidence from Gothic burial sites in the Crimean Peninsula reveals weapon deposit practices that parallel Scandinavian bog offerings, while incorporating local variations that reflect adaptation to different geographical and cultural conditions. The Inkerman cemetery contained over 200 warrior graves spanning the 4th through 6th centuries. with burial assemblages that included systematically destroyed weapons placed in specific arrangements around the deceased. The destruction patterns followed procedures similar to those documented at Illerup, Adel and other Scandinavian sites, but incorporated additional elements such as fire-damaged spear points and deliberately fragmented sword hilts that may reflect local ritual innovations. The Lombard migration from Scandinavia through Central Europe to northern Italy created another pathway for the transmission and modification of warrior afterlife beliefs across continental Germanic territories. The archaeological record of Lombard settlement sites documents the persistence of northern Germanic burial practices, combined with gradual adoption of local cultural elements that created hybrid traditions reflecting both ancestral beliefs and contemporary influences. The Lombard cemetery at Casteltrocino in central Italy contained warrior burials that preserved Scandinavian-style weapon arrangements, while incorporating Mediterranean grave goods such as Byzantine coins, Italian ceramics, and locally produced metalwork. The Origogentis Langobardorum preserves Lombard traditions about divine warfare and supernatural warriors that demonstrate clear connections to Scandinavian Valhalla concepts, while reflecting distinctively Lombard cultural elements. The text describes how fallen Lombard warriors join the divine warband of Woden in preparation for cosmic battle, where they engage in daily combat training and evening feasting that parallels Eddic descriptions of Einherjar activities. The Lombard version emphasises the role of divine women in selecting and transporting battle dead, but identifies these figures as servants of Freya rather than independent Valkyrie agents, suggesting theological modifications that reflected Lombard cultural preferences. Lombard metalwork from Italian archaeological context displays iconographic elements that connect to broader Germanic traditions about warrior afterlife, while incorporating local artistic influences. The Golden Cross of Ogilulf, created in the early 7th century, contains decorative panels that depict warriors engaged in combat scenes, reminiscent of Gotland picture stone imagery, but executed in the Cloisonne technique characteristic of Mediterranean luxury craftsmanship. The combination of northern Germanic mythological themes with southern European artistic traditions demonstrates the cultural synthesis that characterised Lombard adaptation to their Italian territories. The Anglo-Saxon settlement of Britain created perhaps the most extensively documented example of continental Germanic warrior afterlife beliefs adapting to new geographical and cultural conditions while maintaining recognisable connections to Scandinavian prototypes. The archaeological record of Anglo-Saxon England contains thousands of warrior burials spanning the 5th through 11th centuries that preserve evidence for beliefs about posthumous warrior service while reflecting gradual modification through contact with Romano-British, Celtic, and eventually Scandinavian Viking cultural traditions. The Sutton Hoo ship burial represents the most spectacular archaeological evidence for Anglo-Saxon beliefs about warrior afterlife and divine halls that directly parallel Scandinavian Valhalla concepts. The burial assemblage contained a complete royal household arranged within a 27-metre ship that functioned simultaneously as tomb, transport vessel, and symbolic hall. The grave goods included weapons that exceeded practical military requirements, ceremonial equipment suitable for divine court service, and imported luxury items that demonstrated the deceased's wealth and status. The ship's interior arrangement created spatial divisions that paralleled the hierarchical organisation described in literary sources about divine halls. The Sutton Hoo helmet represents one of the most sophisticated examples of Anglo-Saxon metalwork that incorporates mythological imagery directly relevant to warrior afterlife beliefs. The helmet's decorative panels depict scenes of warriors engaged in combat, supernatural figures with bird characteristics, and architectural elements that appear to represent divine buildings. The craftsmanship required for the helmet's construction indicates that it was created specifically for burial, rather than practical use, suggesting that it was intended to identify the deceased as worthy of divine military service, rather than simply demonstrating earthly martial prowess. Anglo-Saxon poetry preserved in manuscripts such as the Exeter Book and the Vercelli Book contains extensive evidence for warrior afterlife beliefs that demonstrate clear connections to Scandinavian traditions while reflecting distinctively Anglo-Saxon cultural modifications. The Wanderer describes the psychological experience of a warrior who has lost his lord and hall companions, creating a poetic exploration of the social relationships that warriors expected to continue in the afterlife. The poem's descriptions of hall joy and warrior fellowship correspond closely to literary descriptions of Valhalla's social aspects, while reflecting the specific political conditions of Anglo-Saxon England. The Battle of Maldon preserves Anglo-Saxon concepts about battlefield death and posthumous warrior service that parallel Scandinavian Einherjar beliefs, while incorporating distinctively English cultural elements. The poem describes warriors who die defending their lord as joining the host of the blessed, where they continue their military service under divine leadership. The terminology employed in these descriptions includes cognates of Scandinavian mythological vocabulary, but the emphasis on loyalty to earthly lords rather than divine selection criteria reflects Anglo-Saxon political values that modified traditional Germanic warrior afterlife concepts. The Dream of the Rood demonstrates how Anglo-Saxon Christian poets adapted Germanic warrior imagery to Christian theological contexts, creating literary works that preserve traditional cultural elements while redirecting them toward Christian purposes. The poem describes Christ's crucifixion in terms derived from Germanic warrior culture, where Christ appears as a young hero stripping for battle and the cross functions as a loyal retainer who serves his lord faithfully despite suffering. The adaptation process reveals how deeply embedded warrior afterlife concepts were in Anglo-Saxon culture, requiring sophisticated theological work to redirect rather than simply replace them. Anglo-Saxon archaeological evidence from sites such as Spong Hill, Empingham and Worthy Park reveals burial practices that demonstrate persistent beliefs about warrior equipment requirements in the afterlife despite the gradual adoption of Christianity. Weapon graves continued to appear in Anglo-Saxon cemeteries through the 7th century, with assemblages that included multiple swords, spears, shields, and personal ornaments arranged in patterns that paralleled contemporary Scandinavian practices. The persistence of these burial customs, despite official Christian conversion, indicates that warrior afterlife beliefs possessed deep cultural significance that resisted easy modification. The Beowulf epic represents the most comprehensive Anglo-Saxon literary treatment of warrior hall culture and its connections to beliefs about posthumous warrior service. The poem's descriptions of Heorot, Hrothgar's Great Hall, provide detailed architectural and social information that corresponds closely to archaeological evidence from contemporary Anglo-Saxon royal centres, while incorporating supernatural elements that connect earthly halls to divine prototypes. The hall's construction from timber and iron, its elaborate decorations, and its function as the centre of warrior society create a literary representation of the physical and cultural foundations that supported beliefs about divine warrior halls. Heorot's nightly destruction by the monster Grendel creates a narrative framework that explores the vulnerability of earthly halls and the temporary nature of human social institutions, while the poem's resolution through heroic combat demonstrates how warrior virtue can restore social order despite supernatural threats. The hall's eventual burning and the dynasty's extinction provide a meditation on the cyclical nature of human achievement that parallels mythological concepts about cosmic destruction and renewal. The poem's treatment of these themes demonstrates sophisticated Anglo-Saxon thinking about the relationship between earthly warrior culture and eternal cosmic patterns. The Frankish territories of continental Europe preserved Germanic warrior afterlife traditions through different pathways that reflected their unique political and cultural development as the dominant power in post-Roman Western Europe. Frankish archaeological sites contain evidence for warrior burial practices that maintained recognisable connections to broader Germanic traditions, while incorporating Roman, Celtic, and Christian influences that created distinctively Frankish cultural syntheses. The Merovingian cemeteries at sites such as Krefeld Gelep and Lavoie contained warrior graves with weapon assemblages that preserved traditional Germanic burial customs while reflecting the cultural complexity of Frankish territorial expansion. The Frankish historian Gregory of Tours preserved accounts of warrior beliefs and practices that demonstrate continuity with broader Germanic traditions about posthumous military service, while reflecting the Christian theological framework that increasingly dominated Frankish intellectual culture. His descriptions of Frankish warriors who died in battle include references to their expectation of continued service under divine leadership, but these accounts emphasize Christian concepts about resurrection and eternal life rather than specifically Germanic ideas about cosmic warfare and divine halls. Frankish metalwork from archaeological contexts demonstrates the persistence of Germanic mythological imagery despite official Christian conversion and the adoption of Roman administrative practices. The Sutton-Hoo connections extend to Frankish royal burials such as the tomb of Childeric I, which contained weapons, jewellery and ceremonial equipment that paralleled Anglo-Saxon royal burial assemblages while incorporating distinctively Frankish cultural elements. The grave goods included a crystal ball, gold coins and a signet ring that demonstrated Roman imperial connections while maintaining traditional Germanic concepts about the equipment required for posthumous royal service. The continental Germanic evidence from the Merseburg charms provides crucial linguistic and cultural documentation for the persistence of traditional warrior afterlife beliefs in Christianized Germanic territories. These old High German magical incantations, recorded in a 10th century manuscript but preserving much older oral traditions, contain references to divine figures and supernatural activities that correspond closely to Scandinavian mythological concepts while reflecting continental Germanic cultural modifications. The charms mention Idisi, supernatural women with the power to influence battle outcomes, whose characteristics and functions parallel Scandinavian Valkyrie traditions, while employing distinctively continental Germanic terminology. The first Merseburg charm describes how the Idisi possess the ability to bind or release warriors during combat, determining who survives battles and who dies in the fighting. This power over warrior fate corresponds closely to Valkyrie selection functions described in Scandinavian sources, but the continental Germanic version emphasizes the supernatural women's authority over living warriors, rather than their role in transporting battle dead to divine destinations. The modification suggests that continental Germanic traditions developed different theological emphases while maintaining fundamental concepts about divine female involvement in warfare. The second Merseburg charm preserves a narrative about divine figures healing wounded warriors that demonstrates continental Germanic beliefs about supernatural intervention in military affairs. The charm describes how Woden and other divine figures use magical techniques to restore injured fighters to combat effectiveness, creating a theological framework that connects earthly warrior service to divine military purposes. The healing emphasis suggests that continental Germanic cultures developed concepts about divine warrior care that complemented, rather than replaced, beliefs about posthumous military service in divine halls. Archaeological evidence from Alemannic territories in southwestern Germany reveals burial practices that demonstrate the adaptation of Germanic warrior afterlife beliefs to local cultural conditions while maintaining recognizable connections to broader traditional patterns. The Alemannic cemetery at Oberflacht contained over 1,000 graves spanning the 6th through 8th centuries, with warrior burials that preserved traditional weapon arrangements, while incorporating local variations that reflected regional cultural preferences. The burial assemblages included spears with distinctively Alemannic decorative elements, locally produced shield fittings, and personal ornaments that combine Germanic artistic traditions with influences from neighbouring Celtic and Roman populations. The persistence of weapon burial practices in Alemannic territories despite official Christian conversion demonstrates the deep cultural significance of warrior afterlife beliefs that required gradual rather than immediate modification. The latest weapon graves at Oberflacht date to the early 8th century, indicating that traditional burial customs continued for several generations after the formal adoption of Christianity. The gradual disappearance of grave weapons corresponds chronologically with the increasing influence of Frankish administrative control and Christian ecclesiastical authority, suggesting that political and religious pressures combined to modify traditional cultural practices. Bavarian archaeological sites provide additional evidence for the regional variation of Germanic warrior afterlife beliefs across continental European territories. The Bavarian cemetery at Aschheim contained warrior burials that demonstrated connections to both Frankish and Alemannic cultural traditions, while maintaining distinctively Bavarian characteristics that reflected local cultural development. The burial assemblages included weapons with decorative elements that combined Germanic artistic motifs with influences from neighbouring Slavic and Avar populations, creating material culture that documented the cultural complexity of early medieval Central Europe. The evidence from continental Germanic sources demonstrates that Valhalla concepts formed part of a broader cultural complex that extended across the entire Germanic-speaking world during the migration period and early medieval centuries. The archaeological and literary documentation from Gothic, Lombard, Anglo-Saxon, Frankish, and other Germanic territories reveals both the fundamental unity of warrior afterlife beliefs and the regional variations that reflected local cultural conditions and historical circumstances. The persistence of these traditions, despite geographical separation, political fragmentation, and religious conversion, indicates their deep cultural significance within Germanic civilization. The comparative analysis of regional variations reveals systematic patterns in how Germanic warrior afterlife beliefs adapted to different cultural environments while maintaining essential characteristics that preserve their recognizable identity. The emphasis on divine halls, supernatural warrior training, and cosmic warfare remained consistent across different Germanic territories, while specific details about selection criteria, daily activities, and theological frameworks reflected local cultural preferences and historical circumstances. The adaptability of these concepts enabled their survival through major cultural transitions that might otherwise have eliminated less flexible religious traditions. The continental connections documented through archaeological and literary evidence demonstrate that Scandinavian Valhalla traditions formed part of a cultural network that encompassed the entire Germanic world rather than representing isolated regional developments. The systematic similarities in burial practices, mythological terminology, and religious concepts across widely separated territories indicate active cultural communication that maintained shared traditions despite political fragmentation and geographical obstacles. The evidence supports understanding Valhalla as the most fully developed expression of pan-Germanic concepts about warrior afterlife rather than a uniquely Scandinavian cultural innovation. The collision between Norse paganism and Christian missionary activity created one of the most complex religious transformations in medieval European history, where Valhalla concepts underwent systematic reinterpretation, adaptation, and eventual incorporation into Christian theological frameworks. The earliest documented Christian encounters with Norse beliefs about warrior afterlife reveal sophisticated missionary strategies that sought to redirect, rather than simply eliminate traditional religious concepts, recognizing that complete suppression of deeply embedded cultural beliefs would likely provoke resistance rather than genuine conversion. The resulting syncretic developments preserved essential elements of Valhalla imagery while transforming their theological significance to serve Christian doctrinal purposes. Adam of Bremen's Gesta Hammerburgensis Ecclesiae Pontificum, completed around 1075, provides the most detailed contemporary Christian account of Norse religious practices, including specific observations about beliefs concerning warrior afterlife that directly relate to Valhalla concepts. Writing as a canon of Bremen Cathedral with access to extensive missionary reports and diplomatic correspondence, Adam possessed unique qualifications for documenting Scandinavian paganism during the crucial period of Christian conversion. His systematic approach to ethnographic description, influenced by classical Roman geographic traditions, create a methodical record of Norse religious practices that emphasise their theological implications for Christian missionary work. Adam's description of the Uppsala temple complex reveals his sophisticated understanding of Norse cosmological concepts, while demonstrating clear Christian interpretive frameworks that shaped his presentation of pagan beliefs. He describes the temple as containing images of three primary deities, Thor, Odin, and Freya, arranged in hierarchical positions that reflected their relative importance within Norse religious systems. His account emphasises Odin's role as god of war, who gives courage to warriors fighting against enemies and receives sacrificial offerings from those seeking victory in battle. The description demonstrates Adam's recognition that Norse warfare possessed explicit religious dimensions that connected earthly military activities to divine purposes. The accuracy of Adam's observations about Valhalla-related beliefs can be evaluated through comparison with independent sources that document similar concepts from different perspectives. His account describes how Norse warriors who die in battle go to Odin, where they join other fallen fighters in eternal combat, creating a description that corresponds closely to Eddic poetry about Einherjar activities, while employing Christian theological vocabulary that emphasises divine judgment and posthumous reward. The parallel accuracy suggests that Adam's missionary sources possessed genuine understanding of Norse religious concepts, rather than simply recording superficial observations or hostile propaganda. Adam's description of sacrificial practices at Uppsala includes details about human sacrifice that he explicitly connects to beliefs about warrior service after death. He reports that living warriors were sometimes sacrificed during major religious festivals to send messages to Odin or to join the divine army in preparation for cosmic warfare. These accounts, while filtered through Christian moral condemnation of human sacrifice, preserve information about Norse beliefs that living warriors could achieve divine military service through ritual death, rather than only through battlefield casualties. The theological implications troubled Christian missionaries who recognised that such beliefs provided alternative pathways to posthumous glory that competed directly with Christian concepts about martyrdom and sainthood. The missionary strategies developed by Christian authorities for addressing Norse warrior afterlife beliefs reveal sophisticated theological thinking that sought to preserve appealing elements of traditional concepts while redirecting them toward Christian purposes. Rather than simply condemning Valhalla beliefs as demonic deception, missionary texts demonstrate systematic efforts to identify theological parallels that could serve as bridges between pagan and Christian worldviews. The concept of warrior paradise found Christian parallels in biblical descriptions of heavenly hosts, angelic armies, and the eternal struggle between good and evil that characterised Christian apocalyptic literature. The Helliond, a 9th century Saxon gospel harmony written in alliterative verse, demonstrates sophisticated Christian adaptation of Germanic warrior imagery to biblical narrative contexts. The anonymous poet systematically transforms New Testament stories into Germanic cultural terms, presenting Christ as a warrior lord leading his retainers against supernatural enemies, while heaven appears as a divine hall where faithful warriors feast eternally after completing their earthly service. The disciples become Christ's warband, bound by oaths of loyalty that parallel Germanic comitatus relationships, while their martyrdoms transform into heroic deaths that earn them places in the divine hall. The Hellion poet's treatment of Christ's death employs imagery directly derived from Germanic warrior culture, describing the crucifixion as a battle where Christ defeats death and hell through personal combat that demonstrates divine martial prowess. The resurrection appears as Christ's return from the realm of the dead with victory spoils that include the souls of righteous warriors who had awaited his arrival. The poet's sophisticated adaptation demonstrates how Christian missionaries could preserve appealing elements of warrior afterlife beliefs while redirecting them toward Christian theological purposes that emphasize salvation through faith rather than death in battle. Similar syncretic developments appear in Anglo-Saxon Christian poetry, where traditional Germanic concepts about warrior halls and divine military service underwent systematic reinterpretation within Christian theological frameworks. The Dream of the Rood presents Christ's crucifixion through imagery derived directly from Germanic warrior culture, where the cross appears as a loyal retainer who serves his lord faithfully despite suffering, while Christ appears as a young warrior stripping for battle against supernatural enemies. The poem's sophisticated theological framework preserves traditional cultural imagery while transforming its religious significance to serve Christian doctrinal purposes. The development of Christian warrior saints in Scandinavian hagiographic literature demonstrates another pathway through which Valhalla concepts influence Christian religious expression. Saints like Olaf of Norway and Eric of Sweden received literary treatments that emphasized their martial prowess and their posthumous military activities in service of Christian causes, creating Christian parallels to Einherjar concepts that preserve traditional warrior values while directing them toward Christian purposes. These saints' legends describe them leading heavenly armies against demonic enemies, participating in cosmic warfare that parallels Ragnarok imagery while serving Christian apocalyptic purposes. St. Olaf's posthumous activities, as described in medieval Norwegian sources, include leading supernatural armies of Christian warriors against pagan enemies, appearing in dreams to provide military advice to Christian kings, and intervening directly in battles to ensure Christian victory. These accounts preserve traditional Norse concepts about divine warrior intervention, while redirecting them toward Christian theological frameworks that emphasize the saints' role as intercessors and divine agents. The systematic parallels between St. Olaf's posthumous activities and traditional Einherjar functions demonstrate how Christian hagiographers adapted rather than simply replaced Norse warrior afterlife concepts. The gradual Christianization of Icelandic saga literature between 1200 and 1400 provides extensive documentation for the systematic transformation of heroic afterlife concepts while preserving essential pre-Christian elements that maintained cultural continuity. The family sagas, composed during this period by Christian authors drawing from oral traditions that preserved pre-Christian cultural memory, demonstrate sophisticated literary techniques that balance Christian theological requirements with traditional cultural values that remained important to their audiences. The resulting literary works preserve detailed information about pre-Christian beliefs, while presenting them within Christian interpretive frameworks that emphasize divine providence and moral judgment. Egil's saga, composed around 1230, demonstrates how Christian authors preserved traditional warrior values while modifying their theological implications to conform to Christian doctrinal requirements. The saga's protagonist, Egil Skallagrimsson, displays characteristics that would have qualified him for Valhalla for admission according to traditional Norse criteria: exceptional combat prowess, poetic ability, and death-defying courage in battle. However, the Christian author presents these qualities as gifts from God rather than qualifications for pagan afterlife destinations, creating a theological framework that preserves traditional hero worship while directing it toward Christian purposes. The saga's treatment of death and posthumous existence reveals systematic Christian modification of traditional Norse concepts about warrior afterlife. Warriors who die courageously in battle receive Christian funeral rites and burial in consecrated ground, while their posthumous activities involve intercession for living family members rather than participation in cosmic warfare. The modification preserves the essential concept that exceptional warriors continue to influence earthly affairs after death, while redirecting their activities toward Christian theological purposes that emphasize prayer and divine mercy rather than eternal combat. Njal's saga, composed during the late 13th century, provides perhaps the most sophisticated example of Christian adaptation of traditional heroic values within saga literature. The saga's complex narrative structure explores the tension between traditional concepts of honour and revenge that characterized pre-Christian warrior culture and Christian teachings about forgiveness and divine judgment. The work's Christian author demonstrates deep understanding of traditional values while systematically showing how Christian alternatives provide superior solutions to the moral dilemmas that traditional honour codes created. The saga's climactic burning of Njal and his family transforms traditional concepts about heroic death through fire into Christian martyrdom imagery that emphasises their innocence and piety rather than their martial prowess. The victims' posthumous activities involve appearing in dreams to provide spiritual guidance and prophetic warnings, rather than leading supernatural war bands or participating in cosmic battles. The Christian reinterpretation preserves the essential concept that exceptional individuals continue to influence earthly affairs after death, while redirecting their activities towards spiritual rather than military purposes. Grettir's saga demonstrates how Christian authors addressed the problematic aspects of traditional warrior heroes, whose characteristics included violence, pride, and resistance to social authority that conflicted with Christian moral teachings. The saga's protagonist displays exceptional physical strength and combat ability that would traditionally qualify him for divine warrior service, but his antisocial behaviour and eventual outlawry create moral ambiguities that require sophisticated theological treatment. The Christian author resolves these tensions by emphasising Grettir's tragic fate as divine punishment for his pride, while preserving admiration for his heroic qualities. The saga's treatment of supernatural elements reveals systematic Christian modification of traditional Norse concepts about the boundary between living and dead. Grettir's encounters with Draugr and other undead beings receive Christian interpretations that present them as demonic temptations or divine tests, rather than simply supernatural opponents requiring martial solutions. The Christian framework transforms traditional monster fighting episodes into spiritual allegories that emphasize the protagonist's moral development, rather than simply celebrating his combat prowess. The persistence of Valhalla imagery in medieval Icelandic Christian literature demonstrates the concept's deep cultural significance that required gradual modification rather than immediate replacement. Christian authors consistently employed traditional warrior imagery to describe heavenly rewards, divine judgment, and cosmic warfare, while systematically modifying their theological implications to conform to Christian doctrinal requirements. The resulting literary works preserve extensive information about pre-Christian beliefs, while presenting them within Christian interpretive frameworks that maintained cultural continuity during religious transition. Medieval Christian allegorical literature throughout Scandinavia reveals extensive borrowing from Valhalla imagery that demonstrates the concept's continued cultural relevance despite official religious conversion. Christian poets and prose writers consistently employed traditional descriptions of divine halls, warrior feasting, and cosmic battle to describe Christian theological concepts, creating literary works that preserve traditional cultural imagery while serving Christian educational and devotional purposes. The systematic adaptation reveals both the appeal of traditional imagery and the sophisticated theological work required to redirect it toward Christian purposes. The physiologist tradition in medieval Scandinavian literature demonstrates how Christian authors adapted traditional animal imagery associated with battlefield death and divine warrior service to serve Christian allegorical purposes. Ravens and eagles, traditionally associated with Odin and battlefield scavenging, received Christian interpretations that presented them as symbols of divine providence and spiritual transformation. Wolves, traditionally connected to Einherjar training and cosmic warfare, became symbols of demonic temptation and spiritual danger that Christian warriors must overcome through faith rather than martial prowess. Medieval Scandinavian Christian art reveals extensive visual borrowing from traditional Valhalla imagery that demonstrates the concept's continued aesthetic appeal despite theological transformation. Church carvings, manuscript illuminations, and decorative metalwork consistently employed traditional motifs: warriors in combat, supernatural horses, divine halls, and cosmic battles, while placing them within Christian iconographic programs that emphasize salvation history rather than Norse mythology. The visual continuity enabled Christian artists to create works that appealed to traditional aesthetic preferences while serving Christian devotional purposes. The Ernestave Church in Norway contains extensive wood carvings that demonstrate sophisticated Christian adaptation of traditional Norse artistic motifs. The church's decorative programme includes interlaced animal designs that derive from traditional Germanic artistic traditions while serving Christian symbolic purposes that emphasise the triumph of order over chaos through divine intervention. The artistic synthesis preserves traditional aesthetic elements while redirecting their symbolic significance toward Christian theological purposes. Folk belief traditions documented in later medieval and early modern sources reveal the persistence of Valhalla-related concepts within Christianized popular culture throughout Scandinavia. These traditions, preserved through oral transmission and documented by antiquarian scholars during the 16th through 18th centuries, demonstrate how elements of traditional warrior afterlife beliefs continue to influence popular religious expression despite centuries of Christian missionary activity and ecclesiastical control. The persistence indicates that Valhalla concepts possessed deep cultural significance that resisted complete elimination through official religious conversion. Norwegian folk traditions preserve beliefs about supernatural warriors who continue to influence earthly affairs through appearances in dreams, interventions in battles, and protection of their descendants. These figures retained characteristics associated with traditional Einherjar, exceptional combat prowess, loyalty to their lords, and participation in cosmic warfare, while receiving Christian interpretations that presented them as souls in purgatory or saints interceding for their earthly communities. The theological modification preserved traditional cultural elements while conforming to Christian doctrinal requirements about posthumous existence. Swedish folk traditions documented similar beliefs about divine warriors who participated in supernatural battles that determined earthly political outcomes. These traditions described ghostly armies led by legendary kings who continue to defend their territories against supernatural enemies, creating folk religious concepts that combine traditional Norse cosmological warfare with Christian apocalyptic imagery. The synthesis demonstrates how popular religious expression adapted traditional beliefs to Christian theological frameworks while preserving their essential cultural functions. Danish folk traditions preserved extensive beliefs about supernatural halls where exceptional warriors continued to feast and train for future battles. These halls retained architectural characteristics associated with traditional Valhalla imagery, golden roofs, weapon decorations, and unlimited food supplies, while receiving Christian interpretations that presented them as temporary destinations for souls awaiting final judgment. The theological framework enabled traditional imagery to persist within Christian popular religion, while conforming to official doctrinal requirements about purgatory and resurrection. The documentation of these folk traditions by medieval and early modern Christian authorities reveals sophisticated ecclesiastical strategies for managing persistent pagan elements within popular religious expression. Rather than attempting complete suppression of traditional beliefs, church authorities typically sought to provide Christian interpretations that preserved appealing cultural elements while redirecting their theological significance toward Christian purposes. The systematic approach demonstrates recognition that successful religious conversion required accommodation of existing cultural values rather than their complete replacement. The systematic preservation of Valhalla traditions during the High Medieval period depended heavily on the remarkable scholarly activities of Icelandic antiquarians, who recognised the cultural and historical value of their ancestral mythology despite the complete Christianization of their society. These medieval scholars, working primarily between 1100 and 1400, developed sophisticated methodologies for collecting, organising and transmitting mythological material that would otherwise have disappeared entirely as oral traditions weakened under Christian influence. Their efforts created the manuscript collections that became the foundation for all subsequent scholarly work on Norse mythology, establishing Iceland as the primary repository for Germanic religious traditions that had vanished elsewhere in medieval Europe. The emergence of manuscript culture in medieval Iceland created unprecedented opportunities for preserving oral traditions that had previously existed only in human memory. The establishment of scriptoria at major ecclesiastical centres like Skalholt and Holar provided the technical infrastructure necessary for large-scale manuscript production, while the development of standardized Old Norse orthography enabled accurate recording of traditional poetry and prose narratives. The combination of Christian literacy with persistent cultural interest in ancestral traditions created ideal conditions for systematic preservation efforts that treated mythological material as historically valuable rather than religiously threatening. The anonymous compiler of the Codex Regius, working around 1270, demonstrated extraordinary scholarly judgment in selecting and organising the mythological poems that became the foundation of modern Edic studies. This unknown scholar possessed comprehensive knowledge of the available poetic traditions and applied systematic criteria for inclusion that emphasised literary quality, mythological completeness, and historical authenticity. The manuscript's organisation follows logical thematic progressions that suggest deliberate editorial planning rather than random collection, beginning with cosmological poems that establish the mythological framework before proceeding to heroic narratives that explore specific legendary cycles. The Codex Regius compiler's treatment of Valhalla material reveals sophisticated understanding of the theological and cultural significance of warrior afterlife concepts within the broader Norse mythological system. The manuscript includes all major Edic poems that contain Valhalla references, arranged in sequences that enable readers to trace the development of these concepts across different poetic traditions and historical periods. The editorial decisions demonstrate recognition that Valhalla represented a central organising principle within Norse religious thought, rather than simply one mythological location among many others. Contemporary manuscript evidence suggests that the Codex Regius compiler worked from extensive source collections that included poems and prose narratives spanning several centuries of oral transmission. The linguistic analysis of individual poems reveals chronological layers that indicate composition dates ranging from the 9th through 13th centuries, while regional dialectal features suggest that the compiler gathered material from throughout the Norse cultural sphere rather than relying solely on Icelandic traditions. The comprehensive scope of the collection indicates systematic scholarly effort that prioritized completeness and accuracy over convenience or local preference. The preservation of skaldic poetry during the High Medieval period required different scholarly approaches due to the complex metaphorical language and cultural assumptions embedded in this poetic tradition. Skaldic verses about Valhalla and related mythological concepts employed elaborate kenning systems that required extensive cultural knowledge for proper interpretation, making their preservation dependent on scholars who possessed both poetic expertise and comprehensive mythological understanding. The systematic collection and explanation of skaldic poetry in works like Snorri's Skaldskaparmal created interpretive frameworks that enabled later scholars to understand references that would otherwise have become incomprehensible as cultural contexts changed. The development of prose narrative traditions during the 13th and 14th centuries provided alternative methods for preserving mythological material that complemented the poetic sources while serving different cultural functions. The legendary sagas, including works like Volsunga Saga and Hervara Saga, transformed traditional mythological material into prose narratives that emphasized heroic adventure and family history rather than religious doctrine. These works preserved extensive information about Valhalla concepts while presenting them within secular literary frameworks that avoided potential conflicts with Christian theological authorities. The family sagas composed during this period demonstrate how Icelandic scholars adapted traditional cultural material to serve contemporary social and political purposes while maintaining historical accuracy about pre-Christian beliefs and practices. Works like Egil's Saga and Grettir's Saga contain detailed descriptions of pre-Christian warrior culture, including beliefs about posthumous warrior service and divine halls presented within narrative frameworks that emphasise their historical rather than religious significance. The sophisticated literary techniques employed in these works enabled preservation of culturally sensitive material through indirect presentation that satisfied both scholarly and ecclesiastical requirements. The systematic collection of genealogical and historical material in works like Landnámabók and the various kings' sagas created comprehensive records of Icelandic and Norwegian political history that preserved extensive information about pre-Christian religious practices within acceptable historical frameworks. These works documented the religious beliefs and practices of specific historical figures without explicitly endorsing them, creating scholarly records that satisfied Christian authorities while preserving valuable cultural information for future generations. The genealogical emphasis enabled preservation of family traditions that included mythological material passed down through specific lineages. The transition from medieval preservation to early modern scholarly rediscovery began during the 16th century as European intellectual movements created new interest in national antiquities and comparative cultural studies. The Protestant Reformation's emphasis on vernacular languages and national cultural traditions provided theological justification for studying pre-Christian Germanic heritage as historically valuable rather than religiously dangerous. The development of humanistic scholarship created methodological frameworks for systematic study of ancient texts that could be applied to Norse mythological material without necessarily endorsing its religious content. Ole Worm emerged as the pioneering figure in systematic scholarly study of Norse antiquities during the early 17th century, combining rigorous philological methods with comprehensive cultural analysis that established the foundation for modern Norse studies. Born in 1588 to a prosperous Danish merchant family, Worm received extensive education in classical languages, theology, and natural philosophy that provided the intellectual tools necessary for sophisticated analysis of medieval Scandinavian sources. His appointment as Professor of Latin at the University of Copenhagen in 1615 provided the institutional platform for systematic scholarly work that could influence broader European intellectual developments. Worm's approach to Norse mythological material emphasized systematic collection and analysis of all available sources rather than selective treatment that focused only on the most accessible or appealing elements. His correspondence with scholars throughout Scandinavia created networks for sharing manuscript discoveries and coordinating research efforts that significantly expanded the available source base for Norse studies. The systematic methodology he developed for analysing runic inscriptions, medieval manuscripts, and archaeological artifacts established scholarly standards that influenced subsequent generations of antiquarian researchers. The publication of Worm's Danicorum Monumentorum Libri Sex in 1643 represented the first systematic scholarly treatment of Norse mythological material that applied rigorous historical and philological methods to medieval sources. The work's comprehensive analysis of runic inscriptions, manuscript texts, and archaeological evidence demonstrated that Norse mythology could be studied as historically valuable cultural material rather than simply dismissed as primitive superstition. Worm's systematic presentation of Valhalla references across different source types revealed the consistency and sophistication of Norse religious thought while documenting its historical development through multiple centuries. Worm's treatment of Valhalla material demonstrated sophisticated understanding of the theological and cultural functions these concepts served within pre-Christian Scandinavian society. Rather than simply cataloguing mythological references, his analysis explored the social and political contexts that shaped warrior afterlife beliefs, while documenting their influence on contemporary cultural practices. The systematic approach revealed connections between mythological concepts and archaeological evidence that established Norse studies as a legitimate historical discipline rather than antiquarian curiosity. The scholarly networks Worm established through his extensive correspondence create institutional foundations for continued Norse studies that survived his death in 1654. His students and correspondents continued the systematic collection and analysis of Norse source material while expanding the geographical scope of research to include previously unstudied regions and source types. The methodological standards he established influenced subsequent scholars who applied increasingly sophisticated analytical techniques to Norse mythological material while maintaining the historical orientation that distinguished scholarly study from romantic speculation. Arne Magnusson's contributions to Norse manuscript preservation during the late 17th and early 18th centuries represented the culmination of medieval and early modern scholarly efforts to collect and preserve the written sources for Norse mythology. Born in Iceland in 1663, Magnusson combined intimate knowledge of Icelandic cultural traditions with rigorous scholarly training that enabled him to identify and evaluate the historical significance of manuscript materials that less qualified collectors might have overlooked or misunderstood. His systematic approach to manuscript collection created the most comprehensive repository of Norse source material ever assembled, forming the foundation for all subsequent scholarly work in the field. Magnusson's appointment as Professor of Danish Antiquities at the University of Copenhagen in 1701 provided the institutional support necessary for systematic manuscript collection throughout the Danish realm, including Iceland, where most Norse mythological sources had been preserved. His official position enabled him to command resources and cooperation from local authorities that facilitated access to private manuscript collections and ecclesiastical libraries that had previously remained closed to scholarly investigation. The systematic survey of Icelandic manuscript holdings he conducted between 1702 and 1712 identified hundreds of previously unknown sources, while creating comprehensive catalogues that documented their contents and historical significance. The manuscript collection methods Magnusson developed emphasized historical authenticity and textual accuracy, rather than aesthetic appeal or popular accessibility. His systematic evaluation criteria prioritized manuscripts that preserved the oldest and most complete versions of traditional texts, while documenting variant readings and scribal modifications that revealed the transmission history of individual works. The scholarly apparatus he created for cataloguing and describing manuscript contents established bibliographic standards that enabled subsequent scholars to locate and evaluate source materials efficiently while understanding their historical contexts and textual relationships. Magnusson's analysis of Valhalla material within the broader context of Norse mythological sources revealed systematic patterns and thematic connections that had not been apparent to earlier scholars working with limited source collections. His comprehensive knowledge of the available manuscript traditions enabled him to trace the development of warrior afterlife concepts across different literary genres and historical periods while identifying the most reliable sources for specific mythological details. The synthetic approach he developed combined philological analysis with cultural interpretation that established Norse mythology as a coherent intellectual system rather than a collection of disconnected stories. The tragic fire that destroyed much of Magnusson's library in 1728 eliminated approximately one-third of his manuscript collection, including many unique sources that contained otherwise unrecorded mythological material. The disaster demonstrated the fragility of manuscript preservation efforts, while highlighting the importance of creating multiple copies and systematic catalogues that could preserve essential information even when original sources were lost. The surviving manuscripts and Magnusson's detailed catalogues continue to serve as the primary foundation for Norse mythological studies, despite the significant losses suffered in the fire. The early modern interpretation of Valhalla concepts during the 17th and 18th centuries reflected broader European intellectual developments that emphasized national cultural traditions, comparative mythology, and historical analysis of religious beliefs. The Enlightenment emphasis on rational analysis and systematic comparison created intellectual frameworks for studying Norse mythology that avoided the theological controversies that had previously limited scholarly investigation of pre-Christian religious material. The development of comparative philology provided methodological tools for analysing the relationships between Germanic mythological traditions and similar concepts in other Indo-European cultures. The emergence of Romantic nationalism during the 18th century created new cultural contexts for interpreting Norse mythological material that emphasised its relevance to contemporary European identity and cultural development. Scholars like Paul Henri Mallet began presenting Norse mythology as the ancestral heritage of modern European civilization, rather than simply the primitive beliefs of ancient Germanic tribes. This interpretive shift created popular interest in Norse mythological material, while establishing cultural frameworks that connected ancient beliefs to contemporary national identities and political aspirations. Mallet's introduction à l'Histoire de Danemark represented the first systematic attempt to present Norse mythology to a general European audience through interpretive frameworks that emphasized its cultural and historical significance rather than its religious content. His presentation of Valhalla concepts focused on their social and political functions within ancient Germanic society, while drawing parallels to classical Greek and Roman religious traditions that were already familiar to educated European readers. The comparative approach demonstrated that Norse mythology possessed intellectual sophistication comparable to classical traditions while serving similar cultural functions within Germanic society. The Romantic interpretation of Valhalla during this period emphasized the heroic and aesthetic aspects of warrior afterlife concepts, while minimizing or reinterpreting elements that conflicted with contemporary Christian moral standards. Scholars and popular writers consistently presented the Einherjar as noble warriors motivated by honor and duty rather than violence and aggression, creating idealized versions of Norse heroic culture that appealed to contemporary European sensibilities. The romanticization process preserved interest in Norse mythological material while modifying its interpretation to serve contemporary cultural and political purposes. The development of comparative mythology during the 18th century provided scholarly frameworks for understanding Valhalla concepts within broader Indo-European religious traditions, rather than treating them as uniquely Germanic cultural phenomena. Scholars began identifying systematic parallels between Norse warrior afterlife beliefs and similar concepts in Celtic, Indo-Iranian, and classical traditions that suggested common ancestral origins and shared cultural functions. The comparative approach revealed underlying patterns and structures that connected Norse mythology to broader human religious experience, while documenting its distinctive characteristics and cultural adaptations. The systematic comparison of Germanic and Celtic warrior afterlife traditions revealed striking parallels that suggested either common ancestral origins or extensive cultural contact between these related Indo-European populations. Celtic concepts about the otherworld halls, where heroes feasted eternally after death in battle, displayed remarkable similarities to Valhalla descriptions, while maintaining distinctively Celtic characteristics that reflected different cultural contexts and historical developments. The comparative analysis demonstrated that warrior afterlife beliefs represented widespread Indo-European religious patterns rather than unique Germanic innovations. Similar comparative work on Indo-Iranian traditions revealed additional parallels that supported theories about common Indo-European ancestral religions that had influenced the development of warrior afterlife concepts across multiple cultural traditions. The Zoroastrian House of Song and the Vedic Hall of Indra displayed structural similarities to Valhalla that suggested shared mythological patterns while maintaining distinctive theological and cultural characteristics that reflected their specific historical contexts. The systematic documentation of these parallels established Norse mythology as part of broader Indo-European religious traditions rather than isolated Scandinavian cultural phenomena. The application of comparative philological methods to mythological terminology revealed systematic linguistic relationships that supported theories about common ancestral origins for Indo-European warrior afterlife concepts. The analysis of terms related to divine halls, warrior selection, and posthumous military service across different Indo-European languages revealed regular sound correspondences and semantic developments that indicated shared etymological origins, despite centuries of independent cultural development. The linguistic evidence provided objective support for comparative mythological theories, while documenting the historical processes through which common ancestral beliefs had developed into distinctive cultural traditions. The integration of archaeological evidence into comparative mythological studies during the late 18th century provided material support for theories about Indo-European religious traditions, while documenting the historical context within which these beliefs had developed and changed. The systematic analysis of burial practices, weapon deposits, and architectural remains across different Indo-European territories revealed consistent patterns that supported literary evidence about warrior afterlife beliefs while providing chronological frameworks for understanding their historical development. The archaeological approach established Norse mythology as part of documented historical processes, rather than timeless cultural phenomena. The systematic archaeological discoveries that transformed scholarly understanding of Germanic warrior culture during the 19th and 20th centuries provided unprecedented material evidence for the social and religious context that produced Valhalla beliefs. The excavation of major hall complexes, weapon deposits, and burial sites reveal the physical foundations of warrior-centered society that extended far beyond literary descriptions, demonstrating that Valhalla represented the mythological culmination of actual cultural practices rather than pure fantasy. These discoveries coincided with the rise of Romantic nationalism across Europe, where Valhalla became a powerful symbol of Germanic identity that transcended its original religious context to serve contemporary political and cultural purposes. The emergence of Romantic nationalism during the 19th century transformed Valhalla from a subject of antiquarian curiosity into a central symbol of Germanic cultural identity that could mobilize popular sentiment and political action. The Brothers Grimm's systematic collection of Germanic folklore and mythology during the early 1800s established scholarly frameworks for understanding Norse traditions as expressions of fundamental Germanic character traits rather than historical curiosities. Their work emphasized the continuity between ancient mythological concepts and contemporary German cultural values, creating intellectual foundations for nationalist movements that sought to revive Germanic traditions as alternatives to French cultural hegemony and Christian universalism. Jacob Grimm's Deutsche Mythologie presented Valhalla as the supreme expression of Germanic warrior ideals that had shaped European civilization through centuries of conquest and cultural development. His systematic analysis of mythological sources emphasized the moral and spiritual dimensions of warrior culture, presenting the Einherjar as noble heroes motivated by honor, loyalty and sacrifice rather than mere violence and aggression. The romanticized interpretation transformed Valhalla from a pagan afterlife destination into a symbol of Germanic virtue that could inspire contemporary cultural and political renewal without conflicting with Christian religious sensibilities. The Ragnarök cycle, composed between 1848 and 1874, represented the most influential artistic interpretation of Germanic mythology that established popular understanding of Valhalla concepts throughout European and American culture. Richard Wagner's systematic adaptation of Norse and Germanic mythological sources created a comprehensive artistic vision that combined ancient heroic themes with contemporary romantic philosophical concepts, producing operatic works that presented Germanic mythology as the foundation of European cultural identity. The musical and dramatic power of Wagner's interpretation established Valhalla imagery in popular consciousness far beyond the influence of scholarly or literary treatments. Wagner's Das Rheingold opens with the construction of Valhalla as a symbol of divine power and cosmic order, but his interpretation emphasizes the moral ambiguities and ultimate limitations of warrior culture rather than simply celebrating Germanic heroic ideals. The gods' use of deception and coercion to build their hall creates dramatic tension that explores the ethical costs of power and the inevitable consequences of compromising moral principles for political advantage. Wagner's sophisticated treatment transformed traditional mythological material into philosophical exploration of modern political and social issues, while preserving the aesthetic appeal of ancient heroic imagery. The Ring Cycle's presentation of Ragnarök as the destruction of corrupt divine order and the emergence of renewed world based on love rather than power reflected Wagner's integration of contemporary revolutionary political ideas with ancient mythological frameworks. His interpretation presented Valhalla's destruction as necessary for moral and spiritual renewal, creating artistic works that use Germanic mythological imagery to critique existing political and social institutions rather than simply glorifying ancient traditions. The revolutionary implications of Wagner's interpretation influenced subsequent political movements that employed Germanic mythology for radical rather than conservative purposes. The massive popular success of Wagner's operas established Valhalla imagery in European and American popular culture through performances, recordings, and artistic reproductions that reached audiences far beyond the scholarly communities that had previously preserved Norse mythological traditions. The visual spectacle of Valhalla's Rainbow Bridge, the dramatic power of the Valkyries' ride, and the cosmic scope of Ragnarök created artistic experiences that embedded Germanic mythological concepts in popular consciousness through emotional and aesthetic impact rather than intellectual analysis. The widespread cultural influence of Wagner's interpretation shaped popular understanding of Norse mythology for subsequent generations. The archaeological revolution of the late 19th and early 20th centuries has provided material evidence that fundamentally altered scholarly understanding of Germanic warrior culture and its relationship to mythological traditions. The systematic excavation of sites like Sutton Hoo, Gamla Uppsala, and the Oseberg ship burial revealed the sophisticated material culture that supported warrior-centered societies throughout early medieval Northern Europe. These discoveries demonstrated that literary descriptions of divine halls, elaborate feasting, and warrior equipment reflected actual cultural practices rather than pure mythological fantasy, establishing Norse mythology as a valuable historical source for understanding Germanic social and religious institutions. The Sutton Hoo excavations, conducted between 1938 and 1939, revealed burial assemblages that provided unprecedented insight into Anglo-Saxon royal culture and its connections to broader Germanic traditions about warrior afterlife. The ship burial contained weapons, jewellery, ceremonial equipment, and imported luxury goods that demonstrated the wealth and cultural sophistication of early medieval Germanic elites while preserving material evidence for beliefs about posthumous royal and warrior service. The discovery of the ceremonial helmet, with its elaborate decorative program depicting warriors and supernatural figures, provided visual evidence for the mythological concepts that shaped Germanic cultural identity. The systematic analysis of Scandinavian bog deposits during the 20th century revealed the extent and consistency of weapon sacrifice practices that connected earthly military activities to divine purposes throughout the Germanic cultural sphere. The Illerpadal excavations, completed between 1950 and 1956, documented over 15,000 individual weapon components that had been systematically destroyed and deposited during ceremonial events spanning several centuries. The scale and organisation of these deposits demonstrated that weapon sacrifice represented central religious practices rather than occasional ritual activities, supporting literary evidence about the importance of divine warfare concepts in Germanic religious thought. The development of radiocarbon dating and other scientific archaeological techniques during the mid-20th century enabled precise chronological analysis of Germanic cultural developments that revealed the historical contexts within which Valhalla concepts had emerged and evolved. The dating of major hall sites, weapon deposits, and burial complexes established chronological frameworks that connected archaeological evidence to historical processes documented in written sources. The scientific approach demonstrated that Germanic warrior culture had developed through identifiable historical stages rather than representing timeless cultural phenomena, enabling scholars to trace the evolution of mythological concepts through material evidence. Contemporary scholarly debates about the historical accuracy and cultural significance of Valhalla traditions reflect broader methodological developments in medieval studies, comparative mythology, and archaeological interpretation that have transformed understanding of Germanic religious and cultural history. The systematic re-evaluation of Snorri Sturluson's reliability as a source for pre-Christian Norse beliefs has revealed both the value and limitations of his 13th century synthesis, demonstrating his sophisticated scholarly methods while identifying Christian influences that modified traditional mythological material. Modern scholars recognise Snorri's work as an invaluable but complex source that requires careful analysis rather than uncritical acceptance. The analysis of Christian influence on Norse mythological sources has revealed systematic patterns of theological modification that affected the preservation and transmission of traditional beliefs throughout the medieval period. Scholars have identified specific areas where Christian concepts about divine judgment, moral behaviour, and posthumous existence influenced the presentation of traditional mythological material, enabling more accurate reconstruction of pre-Christian beliefs, while understanding the cultural processes that shape their medieval preservation. The systematic approach has revealed both the persistence and modification of traditional concepts under Christian influence. The development of comparative Indo-European studies during the 20th century has established Valhalla concepts within broader patterns of warrior afterlife beliefs that extended across multiple related cultural traditions. The systematic comparison of Germanic, Celtic, Indo-Iranian, and other Indo-European mythological traditions has revealed structural similarities that suggest common ancestral origins, while documenting the distinctive characteristics that developed within specific cultural contexts. The comparative approach has demonstrated that Valhalla represented the most fully developed expression of widespread Indo-European religious patterns rather than unique Germanic cultural innovations. Contemporary archaeological work continues to refine understanding of the material contexts that supported Germanic warrior culture and its mythological expressions. Recent excavations at sites like Lejdre in Denmark and Borre in Norway have revealed additional evidence for the hall-centered societies that provided the social and architectural models for divine hall concepts. The systematic analysis of these sites using modern archaeological techniques has documented the sophisticated engineering, artistic decoration, and ceremonial functions that characterize Germanic royal and religious centres, providing material evidence for the cultural sophistication that produced complex mythological systems. The integration of environmental archaeology and landscape studies has revealed the geographical and ecological contexts within which Germanic warrior culture developed, demonstrating how natural environments influence cultural practices and mythological concepts. The analysis of pollen samples, soil deposits, and climate data from archaeological sites has documented the environmental conditions that shape Germanic settlement patterns, agricultural practices, and military activities. The environmental approach has revealed connections between natural landscapes and mythological geography that demonstrate how physical environments influenced religious and cultural imagination. Valhalla's presence in contemporary popular culture represents one of the most significant developments in the modern reception of Norse mythology, where ancient warrior afterlife concepts have been adapted to serve entertainment, educational, and commercial purposes that reach global audiences through multiple media platforms. The systematic analysis of these modern adaptations reveals both continuities and innovations that demonstrate the persistent appeal of Germanic heroic imagery, while documenting how contemporary cultural values and commercial requirements modify traditional mythological material. Marvel Comics' adaptation of Norse mythology, beginning with the introduction of Thor in 1962, established Valhalla imagery within American popular culture through superhero narratives that combined ancient mythological concepts with contemporary science fiction and fantasy elements. The comic book interpretation presents Valhalla as an advanced alien civilization, rather than a religious afterlife destination, transforming mythological material to serve secular entertainment purposes while preserving recognizable elements of traditional imagery. The systematic development of this interpretation across decades of comic book publications has created comprehensive alternative mythology that maintains connections to Norse sources while serving contemporary narrative requirements. The Marvel Cinematic Universe's presentation of Asgard and its warrior culture has reached global audiences through blockbuster films that present Germanic mythological concepts within contemporary action-adventure frameworks. The visual representation of Asgard's architecture, the Bifrost Bridge, and warrior culture combines traditional mythological elements with science fiction technology and contemporary political themes that make ancient concepts accessible to modern audiences. The commercial success of these adaptations demonstrates the continued popular appeal of Germanic heroic imagery while documenting how contemporary cultural values modify traditional mythological presentations. video game adaptations of Valhalla concepts have created interactive experiences that enable players to participate directly in mythological narratives, rather than simply observing them through literary or visual media. Games like God of War, Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and Valheim have created detailed virtual environments that combine historical accuracy with mythological fantasy, enabling players to experience warrior culture, divine halls, and cosmic warfare through interactive gameplay. The systematic development of these virtual worlds requires extensive research into historical and mythological sources, while adapting traditional material to serve contemporary entertainment purposes and technological capabilities. The educational applications of digital technology have created new opportunities for presenting Valhalla concepts to academic and general audiences through interactive websites, virtual museum exhibits, and educational software that combines scholarly accuracy with engaging presentation methods. These digital resources enable users to explore archaeological sites, examine manuscript sources, and understand cultural contexts through multimedia presentations that make specialized scholarly knowledge accessible to broader audiences. The systematic development of these educational resources demonstrates how contemporary technology can serve traditional scholarly purposes while reaching new audiences. The analysis of contemporary Valhalla adaptations reveals systematic patterns in how modern culture selects, modifies, and presents traditional mythological material to serve contemporary purposes. Popular adaptations consistently emphasize the heroic and aesthetic aspects of warrior culture, while minimizing or eliminating elements that conflict with contemporary moral standards or legal requirements. The systematic modification process demonstrates how traditional cultural material adapts to serve new functions, while maintaining recognizable connections to historical sources. The commercial success of Valhalla-themed entertainment products has created economic incentives for continued production and development of mythological content that ensures the persistence of these cultural traditions within contemporary popular culture. The systematic analysis of market data reveals significant consumer demand for entertainment products that combine historical accuracy with mythological fantasy, creating sustainable economic foundations for continued cultural transmission. The commercial viability of mythological content demonstrates how market mechanisms can serve cultural preservation purposes while adapting traditional material to contemporary requirements. The scholarly analysis of contemporary Valhalla reception reveals both positive and negative aspects of popular cultural adaptations that affect public understanding of historical and mythological material. Popular adaptations successfully maintain interest in traditional cultural heritage while making it accessible to contemporary audiences, but they also create simplified or distorted presentations that may mislead audiences about historical realities. The systematic evaluation of these effects demonstrates the importance of maintaining scholarly standards while engaging with popular cultural developments that influence public understanding of historical and mythological traditions. The integration of academic scholarship with popular cultural production has created collaborative relationships between scholars and entertainment industry professionals that can improve the accuracy and cultural sensitivity of mythological adaptations while maintaining their commercial appeal. The systematic development of these collaborative approaches demonstrates how academic expertise can influence popular cultural production while serving broader educational and cultural preservation purposes. The successful integration of scholarly and commercial interests provides models for future collaborative projects that can serve both academic and popular cultural purposes. The future prospects for Valhalla concepts within contemporary culture depend on the continued development of educational resources, entertainment adaptations, and scholarly research that can maintain public interest while preserving historical accuracy and cultural significance. The systematic analysis of current trends suggests that demand for mythological content will continue to grow as global audiences seek cultural alternatives to contemporary political and social institutions. The persistent appeal of Germanic heroic imagery and warrior culture themes provides foundations for continued cultural transmission through multiple media platforms and educational contexts. The enduring significance of Valhalla within human cultural imagination reflects fundamental psychological and social needs that transcend specific historical contexts or religious frameworks. The concept addresses universal human concerns about death, meaning, honour, and community that remain relevant despite technological and social changes that have transformed contemporary life. The systematic analysis of Valhalla's cultural persistence demonstrates how traditional mythological concepts can continue to serve essential psychological and social functions while adapting to serve contemporary cultural requirements and values. The comprehensive examination of Valhalla's development from Bronze Age archaeological evidence through contemporary popular culture reveals the remarkable persistence and adaptability of cultural concepts that address fundamental human needs and aspirations. From its origins in Germanic warrior societies through its medieval preservation in Icelandic manuscripts, to its modern transformation into global entertainment content, Valhalla has demonstrated the capacity to evolve while maintaining essential characteristics that continue to resonate with human cultural imagination. The systematic documentation of this cultural transmission process provides valuable insights into how traditional knowledge systems adapt to changing historical circumstances while preserving their essential functions and appeal for successive generations.